I'm going to make my opening remarks. Okay. Good morning. The committee will come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare recess at any time. Mr. Arrington is very close, and I think I really like to stay on time, as you all know. I want to honor the people who show up on time, and so we're going to begin without him. Today, the Rules Committee is convening to consider a single measure, the Senate amendment to the fiscal year 2025 budget resolution. As has been said by the Speaker and many others, the House's consideration of the Senate amendment to H-Con Res 14 is the key to unlocking the next critical stage of the budget reconciliation process. We are here today to do our part in moving that process forward. The House's instructions remain ironclad, as they have always been since we began our work in February. Our Republican majority here within the People's House understands that this process is not just about simply securing another win and putting another notch in our belt. This process is about fulfilling the American people's mandate and advancing the President's America First agenda. We will use it to eliminate the possibility of the greatest tax increase in history being levied against every American and their families. Provide ample resources to the military so that the common defense of the nation remains unabated. Allocate necessary critical resources to the Trump administration so that it can further secure the border and reinforce national security. Trim wasteful programs, right-sizing our fiscal footprint, and putting us on a path to fiscal sanity. It's just that simple. We ought to remind ourselves of the imperatives that remain top of mind for Americans across the entire country. They want a secure border, lower taxes, American energy dominance, and a smaller, less costly, and more accountable federal government. We ought to address these imperatives without delay, and that means proceeding to the reconciliation process and continuing our work that began just a few short months ago. Republicans are the ones who will do these things on behalf of all Americans. Democrats, independents, all classes, and all ethnicities. We welcome our Democrat colleagues to join us in saving our country and setting it on a path of greatness once again. With that, I look forward to today's discussion, and I now yield to the ranking member, Mr. McGovern, for any comments he wishes to make.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. And here we go again, an emergency meeting. And what's the emergency? Not the tariffs that are tanking our economy, not the urgent need to bring down prices, not the fact that we have 47 million hungry people in this country. No, the big emergency is that it's now time to jam through Trump's disastrous budget. A budget written by the rich, for the rich, to help the rich get richer. That is what this is, a massive transfer of wealth from those at the bottom to those at the top. It's like Robin Hood in reverse. This budget steals from the poor to give to the rich. And it's not just Democrats who think that this bill is terrible. It's Republicans, too. Mr. Norman, not here right now, but a member of this committee, said the Senate version is dead on arrival. Mr. Roy, a member of the Rules Committee, adopting a policy baseline does not change basic math. Mr. Ogles, the Senate budget bill is really offensive. But don't worry, Donald Trump is on top of things. He says, close your eyes and vote for it. I would just add to that, close your eyes, cover your ears, and hide your calculators. He claims he's got countries calling him, kissing his ass to work out a trade deal. I'm not sure if the Penguins have called yet. But the bottom line is that he wants he wants all of you guys to close your eyes and kiss his ass. And I'm pretty sure that you're all about to do just that. What an embarrassment. But I think that is a moral outrage. If you are willing to support this, we simply do not share the same values. For example, I believe it is wrong to gut Medicaid. I don't want to kick seniors off of their long-term health care. I think it is wrong to kick kids and Americans with disabilities off of food assistance. I think it's evil to give tax breaks to billionaires while you're telling working families to beg for table scraps. I think those are rotten, mean, nasty things to do. This isn't about fiscal responsibility. Give me a break. This is about choices. We are the richest country on earth, or at least we were last week. I haven't done the math since Trump sent our economy off a cliff. But we are making choices here to steal from the poor. We are making a choice to help the rich get richer. My Republican friends want to talk about fiscal responsibility. This budget adds to the national debt. There are so many tax breaks for billionaires in here that estimates say that this package could inflate our deficits by more than $5 trillion. That's trillion with a T. So this is not just immoral, it is financially reckless. Budgets are moral documents, and this one tells hungry kids, sick seniors, working parents, too bad. All because Republicans in Congress care more about their rich donors than kitchen table issues. Because of this budget, kids will become malnourished. Because of this budget, grandparents will have to sell their houses to afford medical care. Because of this budget, more veterans will be homeless. Because of this budget, our nation will fall behind and our future will be less prosperous and worse off. Well, I won't be silent while Republicans turn their backs on the American people. This economy doesn't work for most people. It hasn't for a long time. And it hasn't because of budgets like this, where the rich get handout after handout. And I think, plain and simple, that is wrong. Madam Chair, someday we're all going to be gone. And history won't judge us by the size of our bank accounts. It won't judge us by how many tax breaks we gave to Wall Street billionaires. It'll judge us by our decency, our compassion, our kindness, and yes, by our work to ensure that we build a society where everyone can get ahead and nobody is left behind. This is an immoral budget, and I want the American people to know Democrats do not share these values. We reject this budget, and I would urge my colleagues to open their eyes, to read the budget, read the CBO score, and use your own judgment. Make up your own mind, and don't follow Trump over a cliff like our economy. With that, I yield back.
Without objection, any prepared statements that our witnesses may have will be included in the record. I now welcome our panel, Chairman Arrington and Ranking Member Boyle from the Committee on the Budget. Your full statement will be submitted for the record, and we ask that you summarize your statement in 5 minutes. Chairman Arrington, I welcome your testimony.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, Ranking Member, and my dear friend, Brendan Boyle, a proud Fighting Irish fan and a good guy to do business with, but we have disagreements. This one will be a big disagreement, the path forward for our country to get our economy growing, to bend the curve on mandatory spending that's driving the debt of our country that's unsustainable. In the most historic election of our lifetime, Americans resoundingly elected President Trump and Republican-led Congress to reverse course on the failed policies of the last 4 years. Unbridled spending and bad economic policies have weakened our economy, created a cost of living disaster for working families, and pushed our nation even closer to the precipice of a debt crisis, which would be catastrophic and I believe irreparable. We are at a critical inflection point with a generational opportunity to rein in wasteful spending in the federal government, reignite economic growth, and put our nation on a responsible and sustainable fiscal path. The House did this in our fiscal framework. We locked in lower taxes for hardworking families and provided tax relief for small businesses, opened up American energy production after a whole-of-government assault on the lifeblood of our economy. We rein in regulatory overreach, right-sized the bloat in our federal government after COVID, root out massive waste, fraud, and abuse in the federal government, and I think GAO said $160 billion in improper payments, as high as $500 billion a year in fraud. We provide President Trump with the tools and resources to secure the border and strengthen the military. And of course, we do this in the House resolution in a balanced and fiscally responsible way. Despite having a one-vote margin, we passed the House budget resolution that seeks to reduce wasteful spending by at least $1.5 trillion. That's the floor. The goal is $2 trillion or more. While the Senate budget resolution included many pro-growth policies and critical investment in national security, it fell far short of the spending reduction targets in the House bill, with $5.8 trillion in new cost and a mere $4 billion in enforceable savings. Furthermore, scoring the tax cuts as current policy without commensurate cuts or offsets or savings so that the deficit doesn't go up on our watch, Madam Chair, I think is a dangerous precedent. For this reason, it's critical that the reconciliation bill be guided by the House's resolution framework. Otherwise, we do risk adding trillions of dollars to the national debt. George Washington said in his farewell address, don't put a debt burden on the next generation such that you are not willing to bear. Alexander Hamilton said the best way to achieve prosperity is to continuously pay off the nation's debt and avoid incurring more. I agree. We're taking $2 trillion of critical investment capital from the private sector every year, and that's going to double in 10 years. That's the annual deficit. Not to mention the $1 trillion in interest that's squeezing our ability to fund our national priorities, namely our sons and daughters that wear the uniform that protect our freedom and our way of life. But my favorite admonishment was from James Madison. A public debt is a public curse, and in our Republican form of government, it's the worst curse of its kind. Here's the bottom line. Out-of-control deficit spending and unsustainable debt is the greatest threat to our country and our children's future. And no responsible leader, not a Republican or Democrat, right or left, can witness this precipitous fiscal decline and stand idly by defending the status quo. If we're going to usher in the golden age of America, we must advance a reconciliation bill that includes the entirety of President Trump's America First agenda, not just the tax cuts, not just dereg, not just American energy, but reining in runaway spending that threatens to bankrupt the United States of America. As we unlock the reconciliation process, Madam Chair, we must hold fast to the principles established in the House budget resolution. If we do, we have a shot. We have a shot at preserving the blessings of liberty and prosperity for our children and grandchildren. If we don't, and we shrink back, and we miss this moment, this, I believe, will be the last best opportunity to right the ship and to save the country from fiscal ruin. Let's reverse the curse. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Arrington, and I believe the majority of us agree with you. Mr. Boyle, you're recognized. Again, oh, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, and to the ranking member and to my good friend, the Chair of the Budget Committee. The President has instructed the House of Representatives to close your eyes and pass his bill. I hope my remarks this morning will help open some eyes. Let's look at the last 3 months, or even just the last week. 3 months ago, no one was predicting, not a liberal economist, not a conservative economist, no one was predicting recession. Now it is the consensus projection that we will soon be in a recession if we aren't in one now. There have been 3 recessions in the last 25 years in this century. 2001, after the 9/11 attacks, 2008, when the housing bubble burst, and 2020, the pandemic. Each of those were caused by an external event that I just described. What is causing this recession? Donald Trump's policies. Every single day, we are seeing carnage in the markets. Every growth projection from 3 months ago is now showing a projection of recession. Job losses, retirement savings, 401ks are becoming 201ks and dropping. This is all a direct result, not of a terrorist attack, not of a pandemic, but President Donald Trump's wrong-headed policies. So, Madam Chair, I respectfully suggest we should be here as a Congress working on a bipartisan basis how we will stop and reverse the tremendous damage that has been done over the last 2.5 months, but especially in the last week. And frankly, if we don't come together and do that soon, I believe, as do others, that it can and will get far worse. But instead, we're here not to talk about what everyone else is focusing on, from CNBC and news networks on all sides of the ideological spectrum and just everyday Americans. Instead, we're here to talk about this bill that essentially is trillions of dollars in tax cuts paid for either by further debt or deep cuts, including and especially to Medicaid. Now, I will say this, there is a little challenge in terms of presenting remarks in opposition, because I'm not sure which bill to speak about, the House Republican bill or the Senate Republican bill, because the two bills are 99.8% apart. I will say this, I give House Republicans, led by the Budget Committee Chairman, credit. I profoundly disagree, and made that clear over our 12-hour markup, of how much I disagree with their work. But I respect they at least did the work. I respect the fact that they put down in pen and paper what they believe, put $1.5 trillion at least of cuts, which include the largest cuts to Medicaid in American history, as well as other programs. Senate Republicans, they just gave up. They put even more for tax cuts and include nothing in cuts, 0.2%. Why? Because they are using, with a straight face, something called current policy baseline. Now, that has a very official sounding term. Surely that must be some well thought out way of looking at things. No. Current policy baseline is intellectually bankrupt. It is pretending like math no longer exists. It is saying that we don't have to pay for the extension of the tax cuts next year, or the next 5 years, or the next decade and beyond. It's pretending like that trillions of dollars in costs that CBO is certified go to zero. I'll say this, not only do I oppose use of current policy baseline in this context, I oppose it, period. This is a dangerous precedent to set. And I would say to my Republican friends, if this precedent is set, just imagine the next time there's a Democratic trifecta. Do you really want current policy baseline to be used by your friends and colleagues on the other side of the aisle? And then how in the world will we really tackle the growing debt crisis that we have? We all know current policy baseline is a complete fraud. Frankly, if this becomes the precedent and becomes the new way of doing things, I don't know why CBO would even exist. There would be no need for it. Pass a bill, fund something for a week, then immediately pass another bill and say, well, we're adopting current policy baseline. That has become permanent. That's the way things will happen around here from now on, and we will look back at this moment as the moment of origin of when it began. Now, finally, I will say this, whether it's the House Republican plan or the Senate Republican plan or some combination of the two, we do know enough to say, as CBO has confirmed, these include, this bill, or either version, will include hundreds of billions of dollars to cuts to Medicaid. 44% of the people in my district, Madam Chair, are on Medicaid. Tens of millions of Americans are on Medicaid. They might know it by a different name depending on your state. This will have a devastating impact on my district, on my state, and all 435 congressional districts throughout our land. Why would we cut Medicaid? Well, what the other side is attempting to do is to use those cuts in order to help offset the largest tax cut to the top 1% in American history. I believe that that is wrong. I believe that it is immoral. I believe instead we should come together and, in conclusion, on a bipartisan basis, reclaim Article I power and correct the damage that this administration has done over the last week and over the last 3 months. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Boyle. Chairman Arrington, we've just listened to a litany of scare tactics, in my opinion, on what this budget resolution contains. And we've heard these for weeks. And some of my colleagues say to me when we're not in rules, oh, how do you stand to listen to all those comments that are being made? And we know it's tough. But these scare tactics don't apply. It should not be stated here because this budget does not contain what our colleagues are saying. It doesn't assume a single change within Medicaid, Medicare, or Social Security, for example. Is that correct? Let's clear up the record.
Well, first of all, thank you, Madam Chair, there aren't specifics because it would be inappropriate for the Budget Committee of either chamber to lay out the specific policies that would meet these targets. These are targets. Now, be clear, there will be reforms, whether it be on the tax code or in some mandatory program, there will be reforms to achieve those targets. There aren't specifics. The President and the leaders of our party have been clear. There will be no cuts, period, to Medicare, to Social Security, which is exempt, by the way, from reconciliation, or benefits to Medicaid recipients. What there will be cuts to, I can promise you without even getting into specifics, will be part of the hundreds of billions of dollars in waste, fraud, and abuse that GAO has confirmed year after year, number one. And number two, there will be a reversal of President Biden and my Democrats' spending spree over the last 4 years that added $8 trillion to the debt through programs like offering Obamacare to illegal immigrants by executive order, or since they feel so strongly about in opposition to tax breaks for the, quote, rich, then they probably would join us in supporting repealing tax breaks for green energy corporations that not only enrich the corporate CEOs of these green energy companies, according to their narrative, but distort the energy markets, make the cost of heating and cooling homes and putting gas in your cars more expensive for the working people. That's the nature of our mission and our focus, and it is driven, Madam Chair, as I said in my comments, it is driven by the fact that our current fiscal path and the fiscal state of our nation is completely unsustainable. So every program, and whether it's Mr. McGovern's comments about anti-poverty or safety nets for food nutrition, or it's infrastructure and defense, there ain't anything sustainable in this federal budget unless we deal with this growing deficit and national debt that is, I believe, the biggest threat to the country.
Well, we have to figure out a way to say this more and more often because the distortions of what's in our various budgets have been very, very troubling. So your budget allows for needed flexibility to extend the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And we know that after the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, we had a booming economy. And we want to make sure that we get that booming economy again. But our Democrat colleagues have continued to state that these tax cuts drive up the deficit. Isn't it true that tax receipts have been going up ever since the TCJA's adoption?
Madam Chair, we cut the corporate tax rate not to be the most competitive. We're probably in the top quartile, but we were the highest business tax rate of any developed country. And in fact, we put more taxes on our businesses than communist China. So we did what I believe was the right thing to make our business tax rate competitive globally, and as a result, not only did we have billions of repatriated U.S. capital come back to the United States, not only did we have record R&D and capital investment, record jobs, record low unemployment, 6 million people lifted out of poverty because all boats rise on the tide of prosperity that was truly unleashed in the totality of our economic agenda, with tax cuts being the lead dog in that sled. But I would tell you, the other benefit was we had corporate tax revenue at record levels. And so there was the incentive for growth, investment, and job creation and revenue, the Treasury as a result. And we need to continue that growth. But most importantly, if we fail to act and we acquiesce or cede to the opposition of our Democrat colleagues, we will put a tax hike of about $400 billion a year on this economy that will send it spiraling into a recession. And you'd put a 22% tax hike on the average American. That's after they had a 20+% inflation regressive tax hike from the last 4 years of Democrat policies. Completely unsustainable, unconscionable, and that's why we want to simply extend the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act.
Yes, our friends will never admit that inflation is the cruelest tax on the lowest income people. And we suffered that mightily under the Biden administration. And we had practically no inflation under the first Trump administration. And so that's another thing that has to be debunked or explained to the American people, that they suffered a huge tax increase under the Biden administration due to the high inflation that we had. So let's talk about one other mistruth. Mistruth seems like a strange way to call it, but we're trying to be polite. So last time you were here, I asked you about the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act and things that have been said about it that have been debunked. Despite this, the other side states that the Trump tax cuts drove wealth towards the richest, despite the fact that tax cuts went to families across the board. And we heard those comments this morning, that this is all for the wealthy in our country, that that's all that a Republican, those are the people that Republicans care about. No, we care about everybody. We care about the lowest income people in this country, which is why we do what we do. So let me ask you again, isn't it true that the share of taxes paid by the top 1% actually hit new heights after the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was enacted?
Yes, ma'am, Madam Chair. Democrats and progressive think tanks that made some of the same criticisms about tax cuts for the rich at the expense of the poor, those were debunked, and even the Washington Post gave like 3 Pinocchios to comments of that nature. The facts don't bear that out. They bear out exactly what you said. The top 1%, after we did TCJA, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, the top 1% paid a greater share of taxes. Now, I would also add that we have the most progressive tax code among OECD countries, the most progressive tax code, which is why the top 1% pay 50% of the bills in this building and in this massive federal government. And in fact, the top 10% pay 70% of the freight. So, Margaret Thatcher was right. At some point, you run out of other people's money to do all these things that we think the federal government ought to do that I would disagree with. But know this, the lowest 10% income earners actually grew their income and wages by twice the top, and the wealth at the lower end, as a result of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act and the totality of our economic policies as Republicans, the wealth grew at 3 times the rate of the top 1%. So it was a success, and especially because we had 6 million people out of poverty in jobs with the blessing and dignity of work.
Thank you for debunking the things our colleagues have said and putting the facts out there. Mr. McGovern, you're recognized.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not as polite as you. I think this budget is immoral. I really do, and I do believe everything I said. I think it helps the rich get richer, and it really screws poor people. But I just, in response to the chairwoman's questioning, that somehow that there are no cuts in programs like Medicaid. I'm kind of beside myself that Republicans are still claiming that this budget that does not cut Medicare directly. It absolutely does. It absolutely does. And you don't have to trust my word on it. I ask unanimous consent to insert into the record an article from The Hill entitled "Republicans Need to Cut Medicaid to Hit Budget Savings Target, CBO Fines."
Without objection.
Madam Chair.
What this budget-
You originally said Medicare.
No, he said Medicaid as well.
You said
He
Medicare.
said Medicaid. If I misspoke once, I meant Medicaid.
Okay.
What this budget does is direct the Committee on Energy and Commerce to come up with at least $880 billion in cuts within their jurisdiction. $880 billion. Now, Republicans want to be able to claim that there's no way to know at this point in the process where those cuts will come from. But guess what? If you don't cut Medicaid, Medicare, or CHIP, there is only $381 billion left to cut in Energy and Commerce's jurisdiction. So even if you cut literally every single other dollar, you're still at least $500 billion short. $500 billion. I guess I understand why President Trump suggests that you all close your eyes before you vote on this steaming pile of Medicaid cuts. Mr. Boyle, do you want to?
You're completely correct. Actually, took the words out of my mouth. In fact, you don't have to take that article's word for it, or your word for it, or my word for it. It was confirmed in a letter from the Congressional Budget Office dated March 5th to Ranking Member Frank Pallone and to me. And again, everything else Energy and Commerce has jurisdiction over. Only total $381 billion. So by definition, there have to be at least $500 billion in cuts to Medicaid, the largest in American history, in order to meet the requirements of this budget resolution.
No, and yeah, so I mean, yeah, people are scared, Madam Chair. People are frightened because they know what's coming. And with these kinds of numbers, there's no way to not hurt people who are vulnerable right now. Mr. Arrington, I appreciated your eloquent comments on the deficit and the debt. This is the second budget you're bringing to the committee that actually increases the deficit by trillions of dollars. Is this budget you're bringing today better than the House budget?
The House budget is superior to the resolution, to the Senate resolution, without any question, and mainly because they have a floor which is several single-digit billion dollars of enforceable spending reductions. Ours is 1.5 as a floor trillion in spending reductions, and that's the only thing you can bank on enforcement.
So you're going to close your eyes and vote for the Senate budget?
No, there's plenty of time to coordinate and to merge the best of both, but the best of the House bill and what is completely superior and maybe even devoid totally in the Senate is the fact that we actually hold ourselves accountable for the most important and necessary thing, which is bending the spending.
I'm just trying to understand the way you guys think. Let's say I paid $18 per month for Netflix last year. Is it free to continue this subscription this year because I was already paying for it, or is $18 still leaving my bank account every month?
I would just say that is should we assume that in the next farm bill that SNAP will continue at hundreds of billions of dollars a
I guess my point
year?
is, I think it's pretty obvious
yeah.
that I'm not going to get Netflix for free forever just because I had a subscription.
But SNAP
last year.
apparently is
Right.
free forever,
Well,
according
let
to
me-
CBO.
We'll get into the
Okay,
SNAP discussion
yeah.
after I do this line of questioning. But let me try to put it in policy terms. Let's say your worst nightmare has happened. Democrats are in charge, and progressive Democrats are in charge, and we enact a bill implementing Medicare for all for a single month. If we pass the second bill a couple of weeks later to make it permanent, does that bill have a cost of zero? I mean, have I figured out a magic loophole to make Medicare for all free?
You want me to answer that? I don't think that scenario is free. I don't think SNAP is free, and I don't think tax cuts are free, to be frank. So just know that my position, Mr. McGovern, can I just finish? My position has been that giving permanence to tax policy in comparable treatment to spending programs and policies, I think is fair. But what I think is irresponsible is to not offset the deficit impacts on either, and that's been my position.
But this is exactly what Republicans are trying to argue when you use the current policy baseline to extend tax cuts for billionaires. I mean, you really can't make this stuff up. It doesn't cost any money this year because I'm just renewing the same thing that's already costing me money? I mean, really? I mean, I hope that fiscal conservatives in your party aren't falling for this. I mean, it's kind of embarrassing. Let me ask you a question for you. Are House instructions binding on the Senate?
The House instructions are binding for the House, and the Senate instructions are binding on the Senate. But the reconciliation policies will need to be coordinated and concurrent as we meet out the policy-making part of the process, which is the reconciliation bill.
And I'm going to read a quote, Mr. Chairman Arrington, from you. It says, if the Senate is simply using current policy to get tax cuts permanent while avoiding or skirting the responsibility to bring down spending commensurately, then that's a non-starter. So you have to have a balanced budget resolution approach like we did in the House. Let's do solid economic policy, good fiscal policy, and ensure our country and our children's future is solid, end quote. So you just said that over a week ago. Do you still believe that? And, why are you here supporting a non-starter? This is what I'm quoting from you.
I believe it more today than I did yesterday, and I believe it more today than I did a year ago, and certainly after $8 trillion of spending over the last 4 years. I oppose the notion that in the final reconciliation bill that we would have a deficit increase on the watch of a party that claims fiscal responsibility as a core principle. And I will also stand by the House Budget Resolution Framework that is a balanced budget framework. It offsets the deficit impacts of tax and other spending and brings the debt to GDP down, which is the ultimate goal of restoring fiscal health to our country.
So, I mean, we don't vote on notions around here. We vote on legislation.
That's
just for
right.
the record, right?
That's right.
Let me ask you another question. The funny math Republicans are trying to do here is clearly being complicated by the elephant in the room, which is the tariffs. I'm looking at an article from the Washington Post published yesterday entitled, "Trump's Tariffs Could Get in the Way of This Big, Beautiful Bill." Ms. Arrington, Wall Street analysts in this article say the tariffs are making a recession more likely, which will depress consumer spending, and coupled with these billionaire tax cuts will lead the economy to ruin. Do you agree with the assessment?
I will tell you this. There are a lot of wrongs that need to be made right. There's a lot of unfairness that needs to be made fair. And one of the worst things we've done is allow China and other countries to take advantage of us and in this unfair trade dynamic. There will be some pain, I will tell you, and disruption on the front end, but our prospects for our kids and for the long-term future economically are exponentially greater, and there's never a good time, Mr. McGovern. Just like on the debt and the fiscal deficit, never a good time or an easy time to start bending the curve and righting the ship. We got to do it. It's the right and responsible thing to do.
Well, I don't know how adding trillions more to the that helps jive with any of the stuff you're saying. But I also say, you know, and you have more contact with the White House than I do, but you know what? A little bit of advice. Tell them to stop having billionaires tell us that we should be able to take the pain, because the people who are going to be hurt the most by these tariffs, you know, are average working class people. And I think they're beginning to resent being lectured to by a bunch of multi-billionaires who seem to know everything, and by the way, who life will not change for them at all. But I just want to say, when asked about the budget, about this budget resolution coupled with the tariffs, the chair of the JEC, Rep. Schweikert, said, and I quote, "How do you vote on it when you have different groups making up numbers on its economic effects?" End quote. I mean, do you agree with Representative Schweikert's?
I don't know the context to that, except to say that we need to be honest about the math on both sides of the aisle, and we also need to have the collective political courage on both sides of the aisle to address the massive math problem we have as a country.
And I think it's fair to say, based on what you testified to just now, that we're not being honest about the numbers or the impact. You know, and
I think I am, and if you ask me a direct question, I'll tell you I'll give you a direct and honest answer.
right. But I mean,
I don't
don't know how your opening statement is consistent with the budget that you're bringing before us today from the Senate.
It's a fair question. It's a fair question. It's because the reconciliation bill is the bill that advances the policies that achieve these budgetary goals. I said the House is superior, and that the House must drive, and the budget targets and the principles, and especially the balanced budget resolution nature, should drive the reconciliation bill. That's why I'm here. Do I have concerns about the Senate? You bet, for some of the same reasons you've articulated, quite frankly.
And let me just, I mean, you raised the issue of SNAP multiple times, because you know it's a program that I feel very strongly about.
And I respect that.
But the reason why I do is because it's a program that is about making sure people have the resources to put food on the table. I mean, we have 47 million people in this country who are food insecure or hungry. I think that's a national scandal. And quite frankly, I think making sure they get fed, making sure they can access nutritious food is more important than giving billionaires tax cuts. So we have a philosophical difference here. And again, the way this program has been demonized, I think, is also a scandal. Again, the vast, overwhelming majority of people on this program are children, are seniors, you know, are people with disabilities. And, you know, and the benefit, as we talked about the last time you were here, is about $2 per person per meal on average. That's it. With the cuts that you're proposing in your budget, it'll bring it down to about $1.60. Try to find a cup of coffee in this Capitol building for $2. And that's where you're looking at. I mean, not at loopholes that allow billionaires in this country to pay a lower effective tax rate than police officers or firefighters or, you know, or teachers. So, yeah, that's why I feel very strongly about it. And I'm going to fight with every ounce of energy that I have to make sure that we don't increase hunger in this country.
May I respond to that?
You may, yeah.
Because I served with you on the Ag Committee, and I know you're passionate about it, and I totally appreciate that. I think all of us want every family to have the basic necessities for life and for flourishing.
Do you think $2 per meal is an adequate benefit?
I think you and I philosophically disagree that the federal government is the answer to every problem in America. And I
don't
think you
believe it
think,
is the answer to every
well,
problem.
but if you thought, this is my opinion, but if you were as impassioned on this issue of feeding hungry working families, or those families struggling who are looking for work, who can work and still looking for work, then you'd be just as impassioned about the damage done by the 21% increase in the cost of food and gas to get these folks to their jobs and to feed their families. So it goes it has to be consistent.
That's why I'm fighting against these tariffs. 'Cause the price
But
of
did
food
you
is gonna
fight
go way
against
up.
this
Yeah.
inflation?
Yeah.
Were you as critical of the inflation tax?
COVID resulted in a lot of the inflation that
You don't
we
think
dealt with,
spending had anything to do with
is.
it?
But right now, it is Donald Trump's tariffs that are driving food costs up. I would just simply say, you know what, the majority of people who are able-bodied, who can work, who are on SNAP, actually do work. You know, do you think they want to? Do you think they want to be on SNAP? No, they'd appreciate a better wage, right? And we can work on, if you want to work on increasing the minimum wage, I'm happy to work with you on that. But you know, work out a pay so people don't need to, being on these programs. But quite frankly, work doesn't pay for a lot of these families. And anyway, but
Do you think we could agree on this particular, since you've talked about Medicaid cuts, we've said no benefit cuts, but
That's
what?
impossible.
No, but let me
with that
let me break it down and just see if we can agree right here and now. There's $500 billion, according to GAO, over the 10-year budget window in waste, fraud, and abuse. That's the improper payment. Would you cut that or not?
Yeah, I don't know anybody who's for fraud.
Okay,
waste, and
okay,
abuse.
but let me, that's
I
fine.
dispute those figures,
Okay,
okay?
but then secondly, you can't dispute this one. If we review the rolls, the Medicaid rolls, and we just ensure that those who are not eligible legally to receive the benefit don't get the benefit so that the program's there for the most vulnerable, that saves $160 billion. Are you for that?
Yeah, I will just simply
There's
say,
just a
I've
list
seen-
of those
I've
things.
seen this
Yeah.
movie before.
But do
And
you
know
believe
what?
that?
And I think that, and quite frankly, what bothers me most
Yeah.
about this budget is not just what it's going to do to our deficit, but what it's going to do to vulnerable people in this country. And quite frankly, I sat through a hearing yesterday in the Ag Committee on SNAP. I know exactly where you guys are coming from. I thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Scott, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to point out that in 2020, we had a $626 billion trade deficit, and that by the time Joe Biden left office, that trade deficit had increased to $918 billion. And for January, Joe Biden's last month in office, our trade deficit was a record $131.38 billion. We have to get the trade deficit under control. It's not going to come without some pain. We know that, but we weren't going to be able to just tell China, hey, pretty please, would you reach an equitable balance of trade with us, and them do it. None of us like the tariffs, but the bottom line is something had to be done to get the trade balance back in line, or there are going to be fewer jobs in America. So, I mean, I'm hopeful that they lead to good trade negotiations very quick. I think it had to be done, and I think that the right people are in place to handle it. That said, Mr. Chairman, I want to go back. I mean, tax revenues, we have the highest 2 years on record, I believe, of the last 2 years of tax collections ever in the history of the United States. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And even though we had higher tax revenues than we've ever had, what was the deficit?
Almost $2 trillion.
Almost $2 trillion. And if that is not put under control, will the dollar maintain its position as the global world currency?
We will jeopardize losing the reserve currency for the world, which is the coin of the realm and the currency for our global leadership and influence, central to it all.
So the Democrats are arguing that we're extending the tax cuts for billionaires. My understanding is that we're extending the tax cuts for everybody. Is that correct?
That's correct. We believe in the principle of fairness. Everybody that's working hard and everybody that's a citizen of this country ought to be able to keep some of their hard-earned money.
And Medicaid, they keep saying that we're kicking people off Medicaid, but Medicaid has FMAP, correct, a federal match.
That's correct.
And it is actually the governors who determine who is on the Medicaid rolls, for the most part, in this country.
Well, there are legal requisites for being, quote, entitled to this program, but those requirements are often disregarded, which is one of the ways you can actually save money and protect the most vulnerable and preserve the sustainability of the program is not allow it to be gamed by states. For example, California allows Medicaid dollars to flow to illegal immigrants who, by the way, on a per-head basis, get more money in American social services paid for by the taxpayer than Medicaid recipients who are citizens of our country.
And I will tell you, I mean, and to me, That's California. I'm from Georgia. I still personally believe the money should be block granted to the states. And as someone who served in the state legislature, we have a balanced budget amendment in the state of Georgia. As all states do, it forces the state legislatures to make those tough decisions. And if we had that at the level that we're at, we wouldn't be in the position we're in right now. And I would also suggest to you that if we had zero-based budgeting at the federal government, we would not be in the position that we're in right now.
Mr. Scott, just to harken back to the, one of the many things that I'm sure are being considered in terms of how to make Medicaid run more efficiently and effectively for the people who depend on it. You mentioned the block grant piece. The fact that you could allow states to run that program and even link the value of that program to medical inflation, which is a higher
quality
index than you would actually turn the outcomes from going down to up for the most vulnerable, and you'd save $900 billion plus dollars. So
How much?
900, almost $1 trillion. So that example is all I'm saying, shows you how much waste and inefficiency that program has when it's being run, poorly run by the federal government.
Madam Chair, this is, we have to get this trade deficit under control. If we don't extend the current tax law, I think we will have a serious recession that will hurt everybody, and potentially the dollar no longer be the world currency. With that, I'm very much in favor of the bill, and I yield.
Thank you very much, Mr. Scott, for your attention to the time. Ms. Scanlon, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So it's just after 9:30 a.m. Do you know where your 401k is? It's down. It's down. Stocks are tumbling again. Treasuries are off because just since midnight, Trump has added more across-the-board tariffs. The Chinese have retaliated, and the European Union just moved 25% tariffs on U.S. goods. So the trade war escalates. I had a town hall in my district last weekend, and the turnout was overwhelming. Actually had several. Since Republicans have all but given up on having town halls in their districts, I want to share what I heard from my constituents and from theirs when I've attended town halls in their districts. I heard from people who are terrified by the turmoil caused by Trump's economic moves, his disastrous tariff war, the layoffs, the cuts to programs that people rely upon. I heard from people whose retirement plans are hemorrhaging value, folks who are scared about being able to afford basic goods. I heard from people who rely on programs like Medicaid and Medicare and SNAP and WIC to make ends meet for their families. All these peoples and their fears and their problems are victims of the disastrous economic and government policies coming from the Republican Party. And it is not scare tactics when the truth is scary. You can't ignore the facts. So in the past week, we've seen Trump cause the greatest market upheaval in recent memory, one that rivals the market crash caused by the pandemic. It may now be beyond it. And while trillions of dollars have been erased every night, we've heard nothing from Republicans in Congress. How long are you going to keep your heads buried in the sand while Trump burns our economy to the ground? To add insult to injury, our Republican colleagues are back again in Rules Committee today to force through a budget resolution that even they concede is disastrous, but it's one that hands tax giveaways to big businesses and the rich and pays for them by slashing fundamental benefits and services in our social safety net programs that millions of working families rely upon. These Republican policies are destroying our middle class. They're destroying our economy, and they're destroying our strength and standing in the world. Despite 40 years, almost 50 years now, I think, of empirical evidence showing that these policy of robbing the middle class to give tax breaks to the rich are a resounding failure. Republicans are nonetheless trying to push through with this party orthodoxy again. These policies do not work. Trickle-down economics does not work. It doesn't help the middle class. It doesn't create jobs. It doesn't increase business investment, and it doesn't grow the economy. What these policies do is allow billionaires and big business to pocket more profits at the expense of everyone else. And it allows our national debt and deficit to grow. It's because of trickle-down economics that we now have the most extreme income inequality in our nation's history. But when faced with these facts, Republicans have no answers. So what are they doing? They're making up their own facts. We heard stories about tax handouts paying for themselves. We've heard claims without proof that every federal program is burdened with massive fraud and abuse. They're now casting doubt on official budget data and making up their own fake budget scoring plan. So they're trying to sneak around our budget laws with accounting gimmicks that hide the true cost of their budget plans. Even with these gimmicks, their plan will still cost trillions of dollars and add tens of trillions to the national debt. If they weren't cooking the books, the debt figures would be even higher. Time and time again since the end of World War II, Republican economic policy has been disastrous for our economy. And it's always been Democratic presidents and Democratic Congresses that have had to clean up the mess created by the Republicans. Then, as now, Democrats are fighting to invest in working families, protect health care, and build an economy that works for everyone, not just the rich. But here we are, about to go down the same road, because at the end of the day, Republicans work for the rich. They work for billionaires and big business, and everyone else is being left to fend for themselves. Now, when this Senate budget bill was released on Saturday, Mr. Arrington released a statement that said the Senate response was unserious and disappointing. And I have to agree, but probably for different reasons. Mr. Boyle, you spoke about the Medicaid cuts that are required by the budget plan put forward by House Republicans. And just to be clear, Medicaid funds medical care for seniors, children, and people with disabilities. Now, we hear from our colleagues that they're not going to cut benefits. So how do you cut $500 billion from Medicaid and still not cut benefits? Because the proposals I've heard have to do with capping Medicaid. So saying that you only, over the course of your life, you only get so much, kind of like that insurance company a few weeks or a few months ago that tried to cap the amount of anesthesia you could get if you were having an operation. Capping who's eligible, kicking people off the rolls and limiting the amounts of benefits they can get. Can you talk about what these Medicaid cuts will actually look like?
Yeah, so first, just to be clear, there's no question, as CBO has confirmed, there would have to be, in order to follow the instructions that are laid out in this resolution, there would have to be Medicaid cuts, because even if Energy and Commerce cut 100% of everything else they have jurisdiction over, that would only get them about $380 billion. So at least $500 billion would have to come from Medicaid. Now, a number of folks on the other side, including the chairman, cite this $500 billion figure, quote, in waste, fraud, and abuse in Medicaid. I would point out GAO later revised their own estimate. They said it's $31 billion in fiscal year 2024 and includes things like correct payments with missing documents. In fact, GAO's report explicitly states, and I quote, "Not all improper payments are the result of fraud." They further say, quote, "This estimate is not designed to detect or measure the amount of fraud." Just to be clear, if there's $1 in fraud, frankly, in any program, I strongly oppose that. I think that we should absolutely correct it. I think it's offensive, frankly, to the people who follow the law and are law-abiding citizens, which are the vast majority of people in our country. But to say that there are, $500 billion worth of waste, fraud, and abuse, it just isn't so. The reality is that real working Americans will be deeply impacted by these Medicaid cuts that have to happen and, yes, are included in the bill before us.
Thank you. And beyond that, when those cuts to Medicaid kick in, it's also going to cause our federally qualified healthcare clinics to go under because they're already on the line, which then leads to people having to go to the emergency room for ordinary care, which then impacts our hospital systems, and they're already struggling to keep up. You know, Mr. Arrington made an impassioned speech about the need to address the debt, but what would this bill really cost? In any world, can it be called fiscally responsible? And how, I guess, what would it cost and what would it do?
This is a deeply irresponsible piece of legislation that will clearly add trillions of dollars in new debt. And, you know, I want to read from some budget experts across the ideological spectrum. First, I mean, it was a joint letter from a number of budget experts, again, across the political spectrum, and this just ran on April 4th. Quote, "There is no point of budget enforcement if Congress gets to pick the score it wants." There was another opinion piece by Brett Loper of the Peterson Foundation, as well as Bill Hoagland, who is with the Bipartisan Policy Center and is the former Republican staff director of the Senate Budget Committee. Quote, "Using a current policy baseline would be a serious act of fiscal irresponsibility, making it easier for either party to circumvent important budgetary guardrails, thereby accelerating the growth of our national debt by many trillions for years to come." And then finally, Andrew Moylan, who's the former executive vice president of the National Taxpayers Union Foundation, not exactly a left-leaning group, said, quote, "Spending provisions should be debated on their own merits, tax policy should be debated on its own merits, and budget scoring should be consistent, regardless of which party is in charge. Trading away baseline integrity has the potential to be a monumentally bad deal, not just for today, but for every budget fight to come." I said this before, and this isn't a threat, it's, I think, a common sense prediction. There is no question that if we set this new precedent of using current policy baseline, it will be used and abused by both sides to hike up our national debt for years and years to come. And I believe that genuine fiscal conservatives, years from now, will look back at this moment and live to deeply regret the opening of the door to current policy baseline.
Well, I want to thank you. I greatly respect your expertise. You are very in the weeds on all this and a real trusted messenger on it. And I appreciate the data that you share with everyone on your House webpage so people can look and see the impact of these various budget proposals in their region. So thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Scanlon. Mr. Griffith, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let me say first that this resolution just moves us forward into the process. And while I would have chosen a different path and have suggested a different path, that's all it does. We then come back and start looking at things. I wish, and I would hope that they might offer it somewhere online, the sale of the Democrats' magic crystal ball. Because I'm hearing numbers, I'm hearing things being said that just aren't happening. Furthermore, Madam Chair, if they want to come back and criticize our final product, have at it. But we don't have that final product. None of this stuff is written into stone, and yet I'm hearing things about us kicking disabled and children off of food stamps, gutting Medicaid, et cetera, and none of that is on the table. Now, we are in Washington, D.C., and we can have differences, and numbers will lay on the page and let you interpret them in different ways. In Medicaid, as Chairman Arrington pointed out, if you make efficiencies, because when we're talking about a budget resolution and ultimately reconciliation, we're looking out over a 10-year period. And if you say that we're locked in with the hyperinflation because of the inefficiencies that we've had in Medicaid, and I'm going to take a minute to explain that in a second, over the last few years and for some time, and merely changing that growth pattern slightly is somehow a cut, then I guess you can call it a cut. But it's not a cut. It's bending the curve on the inflationary factors in Medicaid. And how we get into that, Madam Chair, is, and I serve on Energy and Commerce, so we've been looking at this and studying it. And how we get into that is that because right now Medicaid is you charge the fee, the state sends the fee to the federal government, and depending on what your FMAP, what the federal government, state government share is in your state, different money gets sent. But if it's an authorized expenditure, no matter what the cost is, the federal government is paying its share, whatever that is, and it changes from state to state. In Virginia, it's 50% for regular Medicaid, and of course 90% for Medicaid expansion. We automatically pay it. So there's no incentive for the healthcare providers, whether it be a hospital or the federal qualified health centers, to find any efficiencies. And it's always hard to sit down and try to figure out how you're going to do this. We're looking at a lot of different concepts, but part of what we're looking at is empowering the facilities to find efficiencies. And the cap, and I think everybody's well-meaning in this, but to correct a statement that was made earlier that somehow we were going to cap your lifetime benefits, that is not even being talked about. I don't know where that came from. It's just a misunderstanding. The cap means that we're going to cap the amount per year per individual, and then add to it an inflation factor. And because medical inflation in a whole, Medicaid outstrips medical inflation outstrips the regular inflation, CPI, so that we're not trying to keep, to make a cut by having inflation eat it up. Energy and Commerce is looking at medical inflation +1 or +2. That has not yet been determined. And just capping the amount per patient that goes to a state or to an individual healthcare provider. That then gives the state and the healthcare providers incentive to reduce the extraordinary increases over a 10-year period. And so I guess we're back to that. If you reduce, no, let me finish. Sure. If we reduce the increase that is projected, not actually on the table right now, but projected out into the future, that's a cut. I guess, I've never bought that argument, but then I guess you can say there might be, in theory, some reduction. But it's trying to make all of these facilities more efficient, because here's what my hospitals tell me, Mr. Chairman, Madam Chairman, and my healthcare providers. They understand that if we don't get the growth rate of the increases, not the basic program, but the increases, and the fact that Medicaid inflation is outstripping all other medical inflation and the CPI, the regular inflation, if we don't get that under control, the entire system will collapse at some point in the not-too-distant future. So what we're trying to do with this is both make the government more efficient, but also to make our delivery system more efficient. We're not trying to cut any benefits. We don't want to cut any benefits. We would just want to make the system more efficient, and by doing so, we can find savings. Now, if that's not what we do in the final bill, feel free to come after us. But the fact that people are afraid that we're cutting Social Security, as far as I know, not on the table, that we're cutting Medicare, I know that's not on the table, that we're cutting Medicaid benefits, not on the table. All we're trying to do is to make the system, over a period of 10 years, more efficient and create savings thereby. So that's where we're at. And so I understand that there's concern, but people shouldn't be being scared that their benefits are going to be cut, or that their hospital is going to close, or that the federally qualified health centers won't be out there. In the state of Virginia, my district has more federally qualified health centers than any other congressional district, by far. In my district, under Obamacare, I lost 2 hospitals. One has reopened. One has been able to reopen, modified and renovated, but and so it doesn't do everything it used to do, but it's still there. And before that, people had to travel because it was shut down under the Obamacare policies, had to travel an hour to see whether they had indigestion or a heart attack. And now they've got a hospital back there. But, so I don't want to damage any of that. And we're working really hard to do that, but we also don't want the system collapsing somewhere in the not-so-distant future. With that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you for your excellent remarks. Mr. Neguse, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning to our ranking member and our budget chairman. I have great respect for both of the gentlemen who are testifying today and appreciate their testimony. As you can imagine, Mr. Chairman, I have some questions for you, and you deeply disagree with the approach that House Republicans are taking. First, my colleague from Pennsylvania, Ms. Mary Gay Scanlon, described this, and I just want to make sure that I'm understanding this right. So the resolution that you are here to testify in support of, you have described as unserious and disappointing, right? This is the bill that you
That's
want your
correct.
colleagues to vote for.
What I would tell you is the Senate's attempt at matching the balanced budget resolution of the House fell far short, which
Sure.
was disappointing. And I'm encouraging, as we move forward in the process, to the meat and potatoes of reconciliation, which is the policymaking side, that the House budget targets guide that. But you are correct.
I may be
I was
missing this.
disappointed.
I'm not on the budget committee,
Yeah.
so I want to make sure I'm understanding this right. We're going to vote on a resolution today, right? This is the resolution that the Senate passed. Or am I, that hasn't changed.
That's correct.
Okay, and that bill is a bill you described days ago as unserious and disappointing, right? It's not, I mean, it's not a complicated, those are your
No,
words.
no, but I don't dispute those words.
Okay,
In
so
fact,
that-
I
I just
love,
wanna make
every
sure
time you say it, I want to say amen. Inside my Southern Baptist part of me wants to shout
Well,
hallelujah.
sure. Well, I don't know why you're voting for it if that's the case.
Because there are two parts to the resolution in the
Okay.
Senate. There is the part that keeps our fiscally responsible framework for the House, which I implored my colleagues in the Senate to adopt in the upper chamber. They failed to do that.
Okay.
And all I'm saying is, when we get to the combined reconciliation bill and the policies that will ultimately
Yep.
effectuate the changes,
I understand.
that's what should,
I
the House
understand how
should
you're
drive that.
I understand how you're rationalizing your vote on this. I'm just making sure it's clear for the record, because I don't want to be there any ambiguity. I'll just again quote from this article. It says, quote, this is from The Hill. Arrington criticized the budget plan for creating $5.8 trillion in new costs. That's the bill you're asking us to vote for, right?
I said 5.8 trillion in new cost with only a mere 4 billion
Sure.
in spending reductions
Okay.
that are enforceable.
Got it. But I'm
Because
just,
I have a hard time believing that we're going to do more than what is enforceable and that which we are bound by law, which is why the House is superior.
I
The
hear
House
you.
is pro.
Again, I recognize rationalizing the vote, just trying to clarify your perceptions of this bill. Because you
Of
can
the,
imagine.
of the Senate's version.
But the Senate's
of
version is
resolution.
what we're voting on.
No, we've got two, that's I admit.
I mean, that's
I
what we're
admit-
here to meet about.
I admit it can be complicated for some, and I'm not being demeaning, but let me explain the complication away and simplify it. The House has a set of instructions that are fiscally responsible, and it's a complete plan.
Oh,
The
I see.
Senate
Are those
has-
binding on the Senate? Those instructions?
They are not binding.
They're
on the
not
Senate.
binding.
That's
Oh,
correct.
interesting. Okay, so yes.
And that's the concern I expressed.
I hear you, which is why I'm confused that you're voting for the bill. This is a very circular argument. On the one hand,
Yeah.
you get where I'm coming from, Mr. Chairman. You blast this bill as unserious and disappointing and as increasing the deficit, blowing up the deficit, $5.8 trillion in new costs. Then you make the case that, well, in fact, there are instructions that the House has dictated, and therefore that should ameliorate anybody's concerns about this bill. But of course, those instructions are not binding. So I don't get it. I mean, I hear you.
You know, you're expressing the concerns that I expressed I think, very accurately.
Then why not vote
And
no
there's
on the
still
bill?
there's still the concerns I have. So the more you talk about it, the more I think, my gosh, Mr. Neguse and I actually agree with the concerns that if the Senate's resolution were to guide the reconciliation process, I think we end up at a far less responsible outcome.
Join me in voting no. It sounds like you're a no vote. I mean, that
I'm
sounds like
a
the chairman
very,
of the House Budget
I'm
Committee.
concerned for the reasons you articulated.
Well, I would encourage you, if that's the case, to join House Democrats in opposing the bill. I mean, it seems like you're almost there. So anyway, I'll move
Yep.
on. I want to talk a bit about, I love having the opportunity to have the budget ranking member and the budget chairman here, so we can talk a bit more about the broader
Why don't you
economy.
pick on him a little bit?
So, Mr. Arrington, you posted this on X about a year ago. This is in August of 2024. It's a tweet, and it says, "Nobody knows how to get an economy running like President Trump." You still believe that?
I believe that President Trump's economic
Do you still
agenda.
believe that? It's
Yeah.
not,
Oh,
you
yeah.
Still, you still
And if
believe-
past his prologue,
Got it.
we're going to have a red-hot economy like
past
we
his
did the
prologue,
first.
Let's talk a bit about the present. So,
Yeah.
what do you describe an economy running well as? How would you describe that? What
I
barometers would you use?
would say,
Would a recession count? Is that
I would say growing the GDP by almost an entire 1% in 2 years after deregulation, tax cuts, work incentives,
It's
good
interesting
energy
that you
policy.
used 2 years. Because
No,
it's-
in 2
I know,
years
I
prior to
understand.
COVID.
It's interesting that
Yeah.
you've used 2 years as the marker because, of course, as you know, every economist in the country is now predicting that we will have a recession if we are not experiencing one already. I don't know that most Americans, I'm not an economist, but I think most Americans, whether they're in West Texas or in Colorado, they wouldn't describe a recession as an economy running well. I mean, does that make sense? You don't disagree with that? Right?
I think the American people who voted overwhelmingly and every swing state in support of this president said, I don't want any more of the unbridled spending and failed economic policies of the Democrat Party, with all respect, and President Biden. And the inflation that came with it, and the increased debt that came with it, and the depressed economy that came with it.
Arrington, it sounds like you're defending a recession. I don't get it, honestly.
Oh,
Let's just level
yeah,
with each other.
yeah.
Let's just level with each other.
I'd love to.
Okay? If a Democratic president were in office
Yeah.
and we're taking actions that were causing a recession, you're going to tell me with a straight face you describe that as the economy running well? Let's be serious with each other. You know that's
First
not
of
the
all,
case.
there's not a recession. There is the political courage to reset an unfair trade dynamic with the United States, which I hope you would support.
Okay, so
right?
stock market collapsing,
Yeah.
bond market in turmoil, recession on the horizon. None of that to you constitutes an economy that isn't running well. That's
no.
a fascinating.
Yeah, no,
That's a fascinating position to take. You know what's
Yeah.
interesting? Okay, how about this? How would you describe a 1,000-point drop in the stock market? How would you describe it?
I would say the stock market rises and falls. It's more sensitive to changes.
Rises and falls. Okay,
It's
so
more
here's a statement.
sensitive to, can I just complete my thought?
You answered it. You said rises and falls.
Changes in policies.
Sure.
And a tremendous shift, I think you would agree,
Yep.
with the policies of the last administration.
Okay.
And where this president wants to take our
Is
country.
it a big deal or not? I mean, or filibuster.
Which
a
one?
1,000-point drop in the stock market. How would you describe that
I
to your
think
constituents?
I think it's going to be a much bigger deal when the stock market over the long run improves along with this economy.
Okay.
And along with the worker wages.
That's not what you were saying last year. That's
tell
not
me-
what you were.
tell me what I
explain it to
said
you.
last
So
year.
last year, here's a statement.
Yeah,
A press
please.
release from the House Budget Committee. Chairman Arrington, on the drop in financial markets and the fiscal decline of the Biden-Harris administration's economy. When the stock market dropped 1,000 points several years ago, you rushed to bemoan President Biden's actions and the economy that he was presiding over. You condemned it. Now the stock market drops 1,000 points every day for the last week, and you claim it's the economy running well. Do you understand why that would be a tough argument?
Yeah,
for the
but I
American
can
people to
explain it to you.
understand?
Yeah, I can explain it to you. Because you had consistently bad fiscal and economic policies that resulted in persistently bad economic environment for the American people, mainly 40-year high inflation. So this is year after year, quarter after quarter.
Got it.
And we're talking about the first 2 or 3 months of of Trump's administration, where we're transitioning from that failed agenda.
I get it.
To one that's going to put us in a place
I get it.
of
Okay.
a stronger
So
position.
you want to give him some time. I get it. So 1,000-point drop in the stock market, bond markets collapsing, recession on the horizon. At what point, let's say there's a depression.
Yeah.
At that point, would I be able to get your commitment that you'd say, I don't agree with the president's policies? How far are you willing to go? It's an honest question, because we are likely to have a recession here, again, if we're not experiencing one already in the next couple months. How much pain are the people of West Texas willing to tolerate? Is a depression enough?
Well, I'm glad you asked me about my people, because I can speak about West Texans. They're thinking about the next generation of farmers and ranchers.
Sure.
And they know that the current conditions and relationship that is just completely and totally unfair will bankrupt the farmers of the future. Secondly, the
It
people.
sounds like the answer is there's no limit.
The
You
people,
haven't answered the question.
The people of West Texas will tell you, the day you wake up and you have to beg another country for your food and for your energy, like we have to beg for our drugs to be made and computer chips, you tell me what you would pay to avoid that for your children. And I know you love your children as much as I do. You tell me that there's no courage in this town to do what the president's doing. And we all recognize there's some transition and discomfort and pain. No one's denying that.
What you describe as a transition and discomfort,
Yes.
economists describe as a recession.
Yeah, well.
Job loss,
Yeah.
prices going up,
Yeah.
401ks vanishing. That's what I mean, I understand the words you're using,
Yeah.
discomfort, transition.
Yes.
Those don't mean much to the people of Colorado that I represent, who are going to be on the front lines of ultimately being impacted by the disastrous
How did
conduct
they
that
feel
the
about the
president has taken.
discomfort of the 21%
Let's
regressive
let's talk about it.
inflation tax? No,
Let's
how
talk-
did they feel about that? I shouldn't be asking you the
I
question.
hear you,
but
Mr. Chair, but I always love our give and take.
Okay, okay.
Let's talk about that.
All right.
I'd like to call attention to the gentleman that you're now into almost 12 minutes. And we have a lot of other people willing to speak.
I understand, Madam Chair. I'm respectful. And I
Call to your, excuse me, just want to call to your attention.
I will
Thank
not
you.
belabor it, but I do want to talk about trade, because you referenced it, Chairman Arrington, and I think you would agree trade is an important
Yes,
priority for the future growth of our economy.
100%.
Okay. Do you agree with the president's tariffs?
I agree with the reciprocal trade policies
Sure.
that treat the products of other countries
not a
the
gotcha.
same they treat
That is
our
an-
products.
Part of the reason why I said
Yes,
going a
I
long
agree.
time. Yeah,
I
exactly.
agree with
It's
the
a simple
reciprocal
thing.
trade. Yes,
Exactly.
yes,
So you agree?
yes.
Okay. Do you agree?
100%.
Do you agree with President Trump's tariff formula? Like, do you think it makes sense?
Reciprocal trade formula.
The formula that he articulated earlier this week. Do you believe that it makes sense?
Yes,
Okay. Can you
Yes.
explain it?
yes.
Explain it to us.
The products from the United States that go into countries, the top 20 of which have twice the tariff and non-tariff barriers, actually just the tariff barriers, a 2-to-1 basically tax on our products. If you're talking about agriculture, it's 3-to-1. Those are the top 20 markets that we work with and compete with.
Sure.
And so,
You understand that most economists, multiple economists,
Yeah.
have described the formula that was adopted as nonsensical, as making no economic sense. And of course, the reason is because there are a variety of different contributors to trade deficits. You concede that. It's
like tariffs, non-tariff
Of course, and
barriers,
including capital flows,
taxes,
including supply
currency
chains,
manipulation. Yeah, there's
comparative advantage, geography. So the formula they constructed is not one that's been defensible by virtually any economist.
I
But
disagree with that
apparently
completely.
It
I
meets the
d-
chairman's definition.
Absolutely. It
Okay.
makes total sense
Got it.
that you would take tariffs, VAT and border taxes, technical and quota barriers, manipulation of currency, stealing our IP. At what point are we going to agree as Americans, forget party politics, when are we going to agree that we're not going to let other countries take advantage of this nation and to hurt our manufacturers and
Have you seen
farmers?
how these tariffs have been received in West Texas?
Man,
some
these,
of the press
our
recently?
guys get the sacrifice on the front end for our future and for their children.
Okay.
My guys are all in to support this president.
Well,
And
the
I say
articles-
that unequivocally,
The articles,
unequivocally.
the articles I'm reading,
Yeah,
Fox, West Texas, tariffs expected to hit West Texas, coffee drinkers, construction companies, West Texas soybean farmer expresses thoughts and concerns about upcoming tariffs. I understand cotton farming is big in West Texas.
The biggest in the world.
Biggest in the world. Wall Street Journal, tariffs unraveled. Cotton prices. Boy, I mean, the tune that you're singing and that your colleagues are singing seems awfully different than certainly the farmers in my district that I represent. As you know, I represent a rural district in northwestern Colorado, and I can tell you that these tariffs are going to hit our community very, very hard. I want to just ask one last question.
Yeah.
And because I know I appreciate the chairwoman's indulgence. My last question is simple. I appreciate that you engage in intellectually honest debate and your willingness to come before this committee. And I assume you'd agree with me that debating these matters is really important for the American people.
Absolutely, 100%.
Well,
I enjoy
Madam
too.
Chair, I'm getting to it. What was that?
I enjoy the real debate as well.
As do I. Leader Jeffries has proposed to the Speaker that they debate on the floor the merits of this bill. Do you agree that the Speaker ought to just do that so the American people can better understand the bill?
I believe debate is an important part of the democratic process.
Will you tell the Speaker so that he could accept Leader Jeffries'
I'll share
invitation?
that and send your love and respect.
All right. Might I yield to the gentlewoman from New Mexico?
Thank you, Representative.
Time coming up
I
after,
wanted to just follow up, thank you.
after we have a Republican speak. You will have your time, Ms. Leisure Fernandez. Mr. Jack, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to commend Chairman Arrington again for your thoughtful testimony. You are, without question, the leading voice in our conference as it relates to these matters. And I just want, because we talked so much today about the state of the economy, I'd like for you to walk us through what will happen if our Democrat colleagues allow the Trump tax cuts to expire at the end of this year.
Well, I'll hearken back to Ms. Scanlon, her comments about how these tax cuts are for the rich and nobody else is benefiting from them. And in the pejorative context that she characterized it, like a lot of my Democrat colleagues, and I'm not trying to be mean-spirited, but it's an insult to the working people who had a $5,000 benefit that is $5,000 more in their pockets for median household incomes after the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Again, the working families in America had an increase in income and wages at twice the rate of the top earners after the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And as I mentioned before, wealth growth was 3 times that of the top income earners. So for my Democrat colleagues to oppose the extension of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, it will be a 22% tax hike on everybody in Ms. Scanlon's district and everybody in my district. It will also cost working families about $1,700 after they've lost, and that's a year, after they've lost $1,100 a month because inflation burned a hole in their wallets. So I don't know how, in good conscience, anyone could oppose extending the tax breaks so that our country's economy can come off of high center, create better jobs and bigger paychecks, and provide the much-needed relief to our families who have suffered through 4 years of spending-induced inflation and record-high interest rate hikes. So it's in fact, 90%, over 90% of American families use the standard deduction. They would receive half of that deduction, only half, if my Democrat colleagues were successful in opposing the extension of the tax cuts. 40 million families depend on the child tax credit. And that would be cut in half. If Ms. Scanlon and the Democrats in this room were successful in blocking the extension of the tax cuts, the families with children in Ms. Scanlon's district would take they would have their child tax credit cut in half. And every small business, there are about 26 million around the country, but every one of our small businesses would lose the 20% deduction in the provision of 199A that gives them comparable treatment with corporations and provides the incentive for small, independent, mom-and-pop operations in her district and mine to continue to grow and thrive in spite of the beatdown of the last 4 years. So I don't understand the controversy. And I think most people watching and listening from home, and everyone's district, not just Ms. Scanlon's, are offended at the mischaracterization of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act after all of these benefits that accrued to the American people, not to mention the 6 million people that were lifted out of poverty. I mean, what do you say to the 6 million people lifted out of poverty? And where is the outrage from their passing the Inflation Reduction Act that included what was scored by CBO as $250 billion in tax cuts to the green energy corporations, but ended up being $800 billion in real cost? I mean, I'm just always in this parallel universe up here, but I agree there's some reasonable and credible disagreements on policy. But to just mischaracterize the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act when none of the facts that have been stated about the rich and how working families have suffered at the expense of the rich, it's all baloney. It's BS, just like the scare tactics that have been deployed for generations by my Democrat colleagues to scare us not to reform entitlements that are horribly inefficient and fraught with fraud.
Would the gentleman yield so I can respond?
I'll yield briefly, sure.
Thank you. Well, so the Tax Cut and Jobs Act did not increase wages, did not increase business investment, did not have a meaningful impact on job creation. The average working family only got about $1,000 off their tax bill, but the top 1% earners got tens of thousands of dollars off their tax. And our expansion of the child tax credit cut child poverty in half, but that expansion hasn't continued and is not projected to continue. So I would just seek unanimous consent to enter into the record an April 30th, 2024 report, the tax cut.
From
and
who?
jobs From, I'm sorry, the Center for American Progress.
Yeah, the Center for American Progress.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they were
the
given
tax-
3 Pinocchios, and they actually recanted their statement about these matters. So
The report is entitled, "The Tax Cut and Jobs Act Failed to
Without
Deliver Promised
objection,
Benefits."
the document will be entered, but does not need to be read.
Thank you. I'll reclaim my time. And since you and I both represent districts that have a lot of family-owned farms, could you talk about the impact of family-owned farms and farmers if these tax cuts expire?
it would be the death knell for them. My farmers and ranchers, I suspect, are not any different than many in this room, Republican or Democrat, have suffered mostly with the spending-induced inflation on their inputs. I'm talking about fuel and fertilizer and seed cost. That has made it almost impossible to break even, let alone make a profit. So the biggest challenge they faced is the spending-induced inflation from the last 4 years. They've also found it difficult to hire anybody because in the last 4 years, the policies were to pay people essentially not to work who were capable of working. So we've had a labor shortage as a result. The pass-through 199A 20% deduction is for predominantly small and independent businesses. Family farmers, probably 99% of them are pass-throughs. That 20% deduction goes away after suffering historic drought and these input prices. You would have a nationwide problem with farmers closing their shop, and it would be disastrous. It would be epically disastrous. So we've got to give them some relief and some runway so we can get to a better spot altogether while we're reversing course on the failed policies of the last 4 years.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Madam Chair, mindful of my time, I just want to conclude. Some of our Democrat colleagues contend the tariffs are widely rejected by working-class Americans, so I submit for the record a Newsweek article published yesterday entitled, "Key Labor Union Backs Donald Trump's Tariffs, Something Needed to Be Done." That key labor union is the Teamsters, which represents 1.3 million working-class Americans.
Without objection.
I yield back.
Thank you so very much, Madam Chair, for recognizing me. And I just also want to point out that with regards to the Rules Committee and the manner in which this is a place where we actually do get to debate the issues and the bills that will be going to the House floor. And Chair Arrington, I really appreciate your embrace of that debate, your willingness to engage in the back and forth, which does take time. And in this Rules Committee, I believe, although I've only sat here 2 terms, that there has been a strong practice and precedent of allowing the debate to go on, whether it's 5 minutes, 10 minutes, or Chairwoman Fox. I understand that you actually debated a bill on the Rules Committee for nearly an hour on the Affordable Care Act for 45 minutes on the budget reconciliation. So this practice of having the debate, I think, is really welcome, and thank you, Chair Arrington, for doing that and embracing that practice. And one of the questions that I wanted to ask you was, you said that a strong economy would be about 1.2% GDP growth over 2 years. Did I remember that correctly? I think that is what you said.
I said President Trump, in 2 years of his economic agenda, along with unified Republican leadership, took an economy that was 1.8, I think, percent GDP to 2.8 in 2 years, and reducing the tax burden was a big part of that, but there were other components.
What I heard was that you thought over a 2-year period of 1.2, but even that was a growth. Would you think that given that, would you believe that a 3.2% GDP growth rate would be a strong economy?
Well, after 8 years of President Obama and leaving the economy at 1.8, almost anything above that
So a
is an
3.2%
improvement.
would be a good, strong economy based on what you've just described.
Historically, over the last 50 years, we've been at 3%. The last couple of decades,
So 3.2, the question is whether
struggled.
3.2, because indeed.
Of course, 5 would be better than 3.2.
Well, we haven't gotten 5 in a long time, right?
And 10
But we
better than
did
5.
We did get 3.2% under Biden. We got a 2.3 in 23 and 24. So we have, I think what's interesting is to say, depending on who is the president, there seems to be a shift on what are strong economies. But what we're here today to talk about.
It's amazing what inflation can do to your economy.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
It's amazing what we're talking about with regards to inflation, and because that goes to exactly the issue that I think we're concerned about as Democrats, is that we need to address the cost of living crisis for middle and working families. And right now, the tariffs do the opposite. That we have not seen anything in this committee that I think really addresses that cost of living crisis. The tariffs are going through the roof in terms of what it's going to mean for us. And these budget tax cuts, they are going to give tax cuts to the richest billionaires, and they're going to be paid for by hungry children, pregnant moms, and the elderly in nursing homes. And it is indeed a moral moment, because if we cut, as the budget resolution says, where it has all those reds, right? All the little reds sort of cut by 880 billion here, cut by 330 billion here. There are cuts to education, small businesses, clean energy, infrastructure, and the biggest benefits are going to go to cash cuts for the rich. That's why I think it's really important that Americans know what's going to happen in your district.
Yeah. We're
Representative Boyle, I am very appreciative of your Democrats-budget.house.gov, because what you've done in this document is list out how many Medicaid beneficiaries are in each person's district, who's going to get the benefit of the tax cuts in the districts, what are the education cuts going to look like in the districts. And I think that making sure Americans actually see the numbers and not just the rhetoric is important. Why did you actually put this document together?
Well, first, I'm just so glad to finally get a question. Chairman Arrington's been having all the fun by himself. But yes, again, it's Democrats-budget.house.gov. Our Budget Committee staff worked incredibly hard to create this tool that everyone can use, whether members, staff, or the millions and millions who are no doubt watching us on C-SPAN, you can tune in to that website and use that tool, because everyone should be aware of what the real-world impacts will be if this were to become law.
Well, thank you very much for doing that. And Chair Arrington, I want to go back to the issue of where the disagreements are within the Republicans right now about whether we should move this budget resolution forward. And I'm not going to go into those who called it unserious, but what I'm understanding is that there are a lot of Republicans who are opposed because they want budget cuts, and even maybe more budget cuts than what the Senate has sent over. Am I understanding that correctly? That's where the potential no votes are going to come if they're not convinced otherwise?
Fiscal conservatives concerned about the massive deficits and the wartime level debts would like to see enforceable spending reduction where we have literally trillions of dollars in waste, fraud, and unnecessary spending by the people's government. They trust binding targets more than these institutions of ours that have repeatedly, under both Democrat and Republican leadership, repeatedly failed our country and our children.
So basically, they want bigger tax cuts. They want bigger program cuts and enforceable program cuts.
Enforceable.
I have not seen anybody say they are going to vote no on the Republican side because they don't see anything in here to protect Medicaid. And, you know, in the Senate, we actually had Republican senators who wanted to protect Medicaid. There were 3 Republican senators who voted on a bipartisan amendment to actually explicitly say they were going to protect Medicaid. Now, that would be wonderful if we would see 4 Republicans from the House willing to stand up and say, we will vote no unless we have an explicit protection for Medicaid, because it's not enough to say, oh, it's a scare tactic, because we have the CBO letters and reports that say the only way you get to that number is by cutting Medicaid. And what's interesting is
By cutting
that
Medicaid,
House
just for
Republicans-
clarity, by cutting Medicaid, because you keep using, and I've heard it from other colleagues of yours, by cutting Medicaid, are you saying by cutting the spending to people who are ineligible? Are you talking about cutting the payments to illegal immigrants? Are you referring to cutting benefits for citizens of the country?
I'm talking about $880 billion
Right.
worth of cuts
Right.
to Medicaid. And maybe I would point out, and Madam Chair, I'd like to enter into the record, the CMS report where they actually talk about improper payments. They're improper payments fact sheets. So this is coming from CMS. Madam Chair, I'd like unanimous consent to enter
Without
into this record.
objection.
So
we-
in this report, they actually do say that there are improper payments. It's about 5.09%. But this is what they state, and it's very similar to what Representative Boyle put in, is of the 2024 Medicaid improper payments, almost 80%, 79.11%, were the result of insufficient documentation. And they go out of their way to say, these payments typically involve situations where a state or provider missed an administrative step. They do not indicate fraud or race. Representative Boyle, what do you have to say to this claim that they're not going to cut services, it's just fraud and abuse and race?
Well, both you and I now separately have quoted directly from the GAO report in order to refute the idea that this is all waste, fraud, and abuse, where there's $500 billion over 10 years. It's just not so, and GAO made that clear. I mean, just so everyone can have the full picture, $880 billion of Medicaid cuts. About $8 trillion a year is spent by the federal government on Medicaid. So $880 billion worth of cuts would be about an 11% cut to the program. To act like and pretend like there wouldn't be benefit cuts if you're making an 11% cut, $880 billion worth at least, which is in the House version, it's just not so. There clearly would be benefit cuts. So we should be just honest with people and recognize that there will be a real world impact. I had an event on Monday morning in my district with Catholic Health Services as well as Esperanza in North Philadelphia. They were talking about the noble work that they do. And one of the women speaking, and this is part of her ministry, she was almost in tears and getting choked up about the people who will be impacted if this bill becomes law and these Medicaid cuts happen.
And that's consistent with the meetings I've had in my district. It's consistent with the town halls we've had. It's consistent with meetings at nursing homes, with federally qualified health centers, the American Hospital Association. There is everybody who actually provides services and looks at these cuts, and they're the ones who are on the ground doing this work or saying it's going to potentially shut down rural health clinics, and it's going to really hurt. And I agree that we should always do better, right? If there is a 1% fraud and abuse, which is a lot less than what they're talking about, we should work on that, right? But if Medicaid were a patient and it came to the Republicans to get health care for a cold, Republicans sort of, what they would do, it's like, I'm here for a cold, I'm Medicaid, I'm here for a cold. How do I fix this? Republicans would cut off your limbs and let you bleed to death. I mean, they are
That's
gonna
disappointing.
so harm Medicaid, that
Sorry.
would be awful. And I need to say, Representative Boyle, in one of my meetings at one of our health clinics, a mother came. Her son is a hemophiliac. He will bleed to death from just getting a scratch when he is playing in the playground. Medicaid pays for his medication, which keeps him alive. There were tears in her eyes as she worried about his future. Democrats held a hearing about the Medicaid cuts, and there were tears in the audience's eyes as we listened across from administrators, from hospitals, from health clinics, and then from the parents of the children who rely on Medicaid to keep them alive. And so it is something that we should worry about, and it is something worth fighting about, and it is not fear-mongering. It is fear of the harm that will be done to these families. And so thank you for being willing to fight for this and for being willing to point out what will happen. Because Republicans need to listen to the fact that their own voters don't want this to happen. Republicans' pollster, Trump's pollster, has reported that a majority of Trump voters, Republican voters, are against Medicaid cuts. 2/3 of swing voters are against Medicaid cuts. And what Fabrizio Ward said is it's because 40% of the people, their families utilize it. It is a working family health insurance program. And on here, you could go see in Schreikert's district all the people that will be hurt, and Don Bacon, who's talking about against this, but I don't see him voting against it, even though so many of his people will be hurt. Next door to me in Colorado 8, that district, the number of people that will be hurt. I mean, across the board, people will be hurt, and people in rural districts will be hurt more than others, like my district, where 75% of the women giving birth use Medicaid for their health insurance. So it is something to fight for. And with that, I yield back, Madam. Oh, wait a minute. Do you want some time?
Notwithstanding the comment that my colleague from New Mexico made regarding the chairwoman's participation in 2010, for 45 minutes you spoke in this committee. 45 minutes. I spoke for 15.
Time deal.
That's
I
15
think,
minutes
I think
longest
it's time, I think it,
That's the new rule in the committee.
I think 15 minutes gets it.
Okay.
And I'm especially,
Just for the record, that's the new rule. And when the Democrats are in the majority, I hope
It's
Chairman
not-
McGovern intends to enforce it, because for decades,
it's not
the
the
chair
new
of this
rule.
committee has never shut down debate, and the chairwoman spoke for hours. 45 minutes on one occasion, an hour on another occasion. In this committee, we have the dates. And because I want to talk for 17 minutes, I want an extra 2 minutes to ask the chairman a question. But that's fine. Again, another precedent broken. So I'm happy to
And I think,
yield back.
Madam Chair, it's part of the
I-
debate that we are engaged.
I will tell, I want to say something. I would be much more tolerant of what you are saying if you weren't distorting what this resolution does. And I want to tell you, I believe we're held accountable long-term for scaring people for something that is not in this bill.
So, Madam Chair, because I think I still do have time, I still hold the floor, but I think that this is exactly the reason why we need to discuss. You have a version and a perspective on this bill, which you and your 9 Republicans on the committee can debate and can raise and can ask the questions.
Well-
We have a different perspective and viewpoint on the bill, which we want to raise. And so it's precisely because we have differing viewpoints, and I respect that your viewpoint is one. And so my role on behalf of my constituents is to bring our perspective. Yours is to bring yours.
Well,
If we agreed, we would.
Ms. Leisure Fernandez, if you could go into this resolution and say specifically, you're cutting, as the chairman said, you cannot show that specific people are going to be hurt. Specific people are going to be hurt. You know, we could stay here all day and debate. I don't think it's a good use of our time. And we are taking time, we're making a record of the time so that we can show how much time is used by each side, even though you are in the minority. And of course, elections have consequences, as President Obama told us a long time ago. So I
Madam
think
Chair?
it's past time for us to move on
I
to the
just-
next witness. To the next member.
I just had a question how Mr. Roy feels about this, and Mr. Norman, because they have rarely been constrained by 5 minutes or 10 minutes or
It's not your
25
time,
minutes
Ms.
or an
Scanlon.
hour.
It's not your time to ask a
So-
question.
So, and what?
Nothing, I'm just clarifying that, yeah. So I'm not able to, you're not going to recognize Ms. Leisure Fernandez yielding me for a few minutes to ask Chairman Arrington a question.
I'll recognize Ms. Leisure Fernandez to continue to ask a question. But fairly soon, again, I think we need to move on.
Can you tell me what the question you was going to ask, Representative?
Yeah, I don't
Chairman
understand.
Arrington?
You're saying I should give her the question so she can ask it?
I mean, it'd be a lot easier if you just let him ask the question.
Are you yielding to
I am
Mr.?
yielding to.
All right,
colleagues
Mr.
on
Neguse,
colleagues.
ask your question.
Thank you very much, Madam
I
Chair,
thank the
for allowing
chairwoman,
that.
and I thank my colleague from New Mexico. Chairman Arrington, I just want to drill down a bit on the last comments that Ms. Leisure Fernandez made, and obviously we've had a lot of debate today about Medicaid. And I take it your position is one you've already articulated, that you concur with some of your colleagues on the other side of the aisle who have claimed that there would be no cuts to Medicaid benefits, right? That's what essentially your position?
Yeah.
Okay. You're familiar with an amendment that was offered in the Senate to this particular resolution that was supported by 3 Republican senators, Senator Hawley, Senator Murkowski, and Senator Collins, to protect Medicaid? Are you generally familiar?
Generally, yes, I am. I don't know the language specifically.
And you understand that amendment failed?
Yes, I do.
I can
Yeah,
represent to you if
yeah, yeah.
Republicans voted against it,
Yeah.
with the exception of those 3 Republicans and all Senate Democrats. If you have no intention of cutting Medicaid, then why not agree to the language protecting Medicaid? Seems like it would be pretty non-controversial.
To be very frank, it's because, and you're a friend,
Sure.
and she's my neighbor, but because you all have already in this hearing, and for weeks, if not months prior to, and you will continue to mischaracterize making that program run more efficiently, rooting out waste and fraud, structuring the program to actually support the most vulnerable as a cut. And there's just, I mean, this hearing is a great example of why there's a breakdown in trust, because Ms. Fernandez just talked about the limbs of our citizens being torn off of their bodies and Republicans watching them bleed out. That is a gross mischaracterization, I think you would agree,
I hear
of
you.
what our intentions are.
my-
But that's the reason why
I hear
we
you.
don't play
But
these games
all I'm
about,
suggesting to you is
Yeah.
Senator Hawley and Senator Murkowski,
Yeah.
these are Republican senators,
Yeah.
they're not Democrats, have some pretty simple language.
yeah, was it Medicaid benefits or was it?
That's what I'm asking.
Medicaid,
is
no, I don't know.
Benefits. I'm saying, you have the
We've
ability-
committed to that. We have committed to
Why not
to
put it in
no
the
cuts.
bill?
We're accountable for what we commit to
Then why
and
put
promise
everything
and
else in
follow
the bill?
through on.
This is my point.
Yeah.
Why, you make much of the instructions that you've
Yeah.
designed. Well,
Yes.
give me a moment here,
Yeah.
and the various ways in which you believe the budget ought to be structured. And it just strikes me that the one quote-unquote promise that you feel really passionate about today, about with respect to Medicaid benefits, happens to be conveniently the one promise that Republicans refuse to put in the text of the instructions. Why not? It would be pretty simple. You could tell the American public, look, we've got it. No cuts to Medicaid. It's
I
in
can
the
tell you,
document,
I
but
can.
you all won't do it.
I can tell you, let me just finish the thought process here, because my friends and colleagues who happen to be Democrats will pervert, twist, contort, and anything we say on Medicaid or any other government entitlement program to serve the purpose, the political purposes of using it as a cudgel to beat on our party, our colleagues, when in fact, it is simply addressing, like I've said before, the inefficiencies of program integrity.
I hear you. I hear
and-
you.
Okay.
And I would just say, and I hear your criticism, but my point is.
And I watched
you
it
all
on
have been-
display today.
You all have been very crystal clear about a lot in this bill.
Yeah.
Right? And my simple point is this notion that you won't put in the bill that you're not going to gut Medicaid because you believe that if you do so, Democrats will criticize the bill as gutting Medicaid. And so therefore, you've made a decision
You will.
to not put, no, I
I
understand.
don't mean
but
you,
I hear
but
you.
if we do, like I mentioned to Mr.
Oh, no,
McGovern,
I haven't- I
look at
wasn't
the
finished.
Medicaid rolls twice
I hear you,
instead
Mr.
of.
Chairman, but
Yeah.
I wasn't finished.
Yeah.
I'm just simply suggesting a lot
Yeah.
simpler, if you feel so passionately about not cutting
Yeah.
Medicaid benefits, to put that in the bill.
Yeah.
So,
One question, and I think
thank
it's
you,
time.
thank you, and I will finish with this,
Wait, Excuse
Chairman.
me, Madam Chair, this is the Rules Committee, and we have a custom here of allowing for
I've heard
debate.
this
And we are now dealing in an emergency rules meeting on a budget that, quite frankly, we think has devastating impacts for the people we represent. And if we're not going to be able to have a thorough debate and be able to say what's on our mind, then I think we should move to adjourn. I move to adjourn.
Will the clerk call the roll? The question is on the motion to adjourn. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no.
No.
That's for a roll call.
Mr. McGovern has asked for a roll call vote. The clerk will call the roll.
Mrs. Fishbach. Mrs. Fishbach, no. Mr. Norman. Mr. Norman, no. Mr. Roy. Mr. Roy, no. Mrs. Houchin. Mr. Langworthy. Mr. Langworthy, no. Mr. Scott. Mr. Scott, no. Mr. Griffith. Mr. Griffith, no. Mr. Jack.
No.
Mr. Jack, no. Mr. McGovern.
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Ms. Scanlon. Aye. Ms. Scanlon, aye. Mr. Neguse. Mr. Neguse, aye. Ms. Leger Fernandez. Aye. Ms. Leger Fernandez, aye. Madam Chair.
No.
Madam Chair, no.
Clerk will announce the total.
4 yeas, 8 nays.
The amendment is not agreed to. The motion to adjourn is not agreed to.
Madam Chair, I believe I had the floor, and I'll finish up.
I'm sorry, Ms.
I believe I had the floor, and I will, the ranking member is, you yield back to me? So I just want to say, Chairman Arrington, that I don't think you've heard anybody say today that we are against cutting fraud or abuse or making things more efficient. We are very in favor of making things efficient. We are against cutting the services that my neighbors across the border rely on, that I know you care about. You know, my New Mexico citizens, it's a region, we're separated by a border, but not by values, I believe. So that's why, you know, we will be asking for protections for Medicaid services. We are not against improving CMS. We are not against improving efficiency, but we do want very specific protections. We'd love to get 4 Republicans doing what the 3 Republicans did in the Senate, which is say, just that thing, we will protect Medicaid services. We'd love to get 4 Republicans saying, we want to vote on Trump's tariffs. If you're for the tariffs, you're for the tariffs. If you're not, you're not. Let people vote on it. We'd love to move these things to the floor of the House, where we could have those continued debates on the floor of the House to let people vote for them. But it is about the services, and it's about the people who we meet with every day that we care about. And that's why we're doing that. I can tell you that's why I'm doing that, not to beat up just on Republicans.
Yeah.
I'm a very bipartisan person. You know, rules is differently, but most of my bills are bipartisan. I have I have a lot of Republicans in my district. I'm a D3 district.
Yes,
it's
you do.
a very bipartisan district. I work in a very bipartisan manner. So I can assure you that it's to beat up on the policy, not on your party.
Sure.
So with that,
May I respond?
sure.
Cutting waste and in all of its forms should be bipartisan. But when you all were running your partisan reconciliation bill called the Inflation Reduction Act, I didn't hear one single recommendation. I hear you want to save. You say, if you can find it, I'm with you. We're all for that. We're all for that. But I didn't see anything in the Inflation Reduction Act that talked about program integrity, rooting out waste and fraud, not one jot or tittle in that huge tax and spending bill. I also, by the way, after listening to what I think is false and empty rhetoric on taxing the rich, how much did y'all raise the taxes on the rich when you passed the IRA? What did you do for the billionaires? Did y'all raise their taxes to pay for the price fixing on drugs or any of the other things? Did y'all raise taxes on the rich? What did you do with the time? If y'all feel so strongly about this, where was the waste, fraud, and abuse reforms in the IRA, and where were the tax hikes on the rich? That's why I find this to not be as credible of a debate as I would like it to be. I certainly think there's sincerely held views that differ, but when I'm hearing about limbs being ripped off and people bleeding out, and I hear we all care about waste, but y'all never put any provision that deals with the waste. You expand the IRS by 80 billion agents, but anyway, I digress. I hear a lot of lip service a consensus around waste, but I see no action. And then when we try to take action, we are met with the same old scare tactics about people's limbs being ripped off. And it's unfortunate, but I'm undeterred. I mean, and I think my colleagues are too, just completely, because we do have Medicaid beneficiaries in our district, and we want to fight to preserve for our vulnerable Americans this important program that they rely on, and to ensure that it persists into the future for future struggling and working people that need it. But we also have a lot of taxpayers in our district. You and I do. We share a border, but like you said, we don't share, we share a border, but we have similar values. My folks and your folks in eastern New Mexico want us to be stewards of of their hard-earned tax dollars. And for us to not talk about waste and not try to right-size the bloat in this people's government would be a huge missed opportunity. And we miss that opportunity regularly because we hear the bylines and the mischaracterizations about what you just said, and they're not true, and we end up just perpetuating this massively inefficient government at the expense of taxpayers who are paying the freight on all of it. That's unfortunate.
Thank you, and as we note that, I think it was very appropriate for you to speak as long as you wanted on this issue. So it's oftentimes that it's not, we were speaking, we were giving our witnesses the time to explain their position.
I appreciate that.
I would say that we did receive over $1 billion out of the IRA in tax revenue because of the audits going against fraud and abuse of those. So that's something that we were doing. So I think we have done. And I would also point out that in the document that I entered into the record, the Medicaid improper payment rate actually went down from 8.58% in 23 to 5.09% in 24. So there is actually documentation of an effort to increase the efficiency. And once again, this is improper payment, which is not fraud and abuse, but even that, we need to make things more efficient. I would love it if we cut out some of the, regulatory overburden so it's easier for people to get paid for the patient care that they get. Because the other thing we know is Medicare is one of the cheapest, right? Providers don't Medicaid is one of the cheapest ways of getting health care. Those who are willing to take Medicaid patients get reimbursed less than they do if you take a Medicare patient. They get reimbursed less than if you take a private insurance patient. So we know it's a very lean, and I'm very grateful to those providers who are willing to take the Medicaid so that patients, because there isn't a lot of fat in that program. But with that, is there anything else? With that, Madam Chair, I yield back. And thank you for the debate and the conversation.
Thank you, Ms.
Chairman Arrington.
Fernandez.
The gentlewoman yields back. Mr. Langworthy.
No
you're
questions,
recognized.
Madam Chair.
Okay. Mr. Roy, you're recognized.
I thank the chair. I want to thank both of the witnesses. I want to thank you for putting perspectives out there that I think are important to hear from both of you. I think I want to congratulate our chairman for sitting here, being here, leading, and I think a difficult position and situation. The fact is, I think this debate lays bare why the American people have lost confidence in Congress, because Congress has been failing them for decades, and in particular in recent years. Both parties are failing the American people. Here we have laid bare the problem. We have, on the one hand, I believe, a responsible budget put forward through the work of our chairman on the Budget Committee and others that worked hard on it, that I believe credibly lays out a path to budget neutrality in what is supposed to be the process and reconciliation of dealing with tax policy and spending policy. I believe it is a credible place. We debated that independently here. I don't need to go in the weeds on it, but it is broken down into spending reductions, tax policy that has revenue impact, and then assumed economic growth that makes up the balance in roughly $2 trillion-ish in spending reductions, $2.5 trillion in assumed growth for $4.5 trillion of revenue impact on tax policy. Now, we're being criticized for assuming that growth at 2.5% growth, which is the sweet spot between historic 3% growth and the languishing 1.9% growth we've been in for a while. And I believe that was a responsible path forward. But my colleagues on the other side of the aisle want to politicize, very specifically, politicize the fact that Medicaid is a part of that conversation and should be and must be. Because Medicaid is delivering subpar outcomes. Medicaid is not delivering health care that the American people deserve. Medicaid is costing infinitely more money. It has skyrocketed from $409 billion in 2019 to $618 billion in 2024, an increase in 51% in just 5 years. A third of the growth in Medicaid's 60-year history was in the last 5 years. It is going to be well over $1 trillion by 2035. This has been recognized as a problem from both parties, and it's spinning out of control for a number of reasons, the majority of which stem from Obamacare's expansion population and the amount that we are now subsidizing the able-bodied, which is empirically true, that we have Medicaid expanded and going heavily to the able-bodied at the expense of the most vulnerable. We have rates at a 90% FMAP rate as compared with the vulnerable population of 50 to 70%, which is out of whack. And everybody actually knows this to be true. And yet my colleagues on the other side of the aisle want to specifically and purposely politicize this. They want to make this all about taking away Medicaid benefits. What we're trying to do is figure out how to make the budget of the United States get anywhere in the zip code of balance, which we haven't done for almost 30 years, 25 years. We have essentially money laundering schemes going on, where states concocted these schemes using provider taxes and funneling the money, getting the federal dollars, using that money to then prop up and subsidize people who are here illegally, put it into their budget, and then they brag about it. California literally bragged about how they're scraping federal dollars on the back of this scheme. Joe Biden agreed that that was true. He was literally quoted as saying, "It's a scam," Biden said. "The states are gaming the system." That's former President Biden. So why can't my colleagues on the other side of the aisle just say, you know what, that's a problem. Let's come together and fix that problem. We can stop the process. We can fix it. I can go through a whole bunch of stuff on Medicaid, but my point is just there are legitimate solutions to Medicaid that would deal with improper payments of about $1 trillion worth of Medicaid improper payments. We could make serious changes to how waste, fraud, and abuse occurs. We can end what is happening with respect to the money laundering scam. These are all things that we could do and save money and still try to retain what you need for the most vulnerable under the program. Now, I concur with the gentleman from Texas, my colleague from Texas, about where we should put most of these kinds of programs. I believe in civil society. I believe in state and local government. I believe we do better when we do it locally. I don't believe the federal government does it efficiently, and I think that is borne out by looking at the numbers and including the subpar care. And I'm not just making that up. Study after study talking about the extent to which Medicaid delivers worse care than alternatives. Studies have shown Medicaid expansions caused enrollees to delay care because appointments were not available. A study in Health Affairs found Medicaid patients experience higher hospital readmission rates than privately insured patients. I can go through study after study. But we also know the money's being wasted. The fact is, of course we should reform it. Of course we can make it better. Now, that's on my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. But I have to say something to my colleagues on this side of the aisle. You cannot have a one-way ratchet on tax cuts and ignore the spending side of the ledger. And my colleagues in the Senate, for sure, and some in the House on this side of the aisle want precisely that. The Senate budget does that. The Senate budget is all tax cuts and no spending cuts. Now, we're told, trust us, there's a promise. There's a promise of spending cuts. Well, excuse me if I don't trust Washington. Excuse me if I don't take somebody at their word that, oh, trust me, we're going to cut something. Just vote for this next thing and we'll cut it. Trust me. I've never seen that happen. And by the way, the math still doesn't math. Because all I'm hearing from my Senate Republican colleagues is, well, maybe we can get $1 trillion in savings. That's what I keep hearing. Well, all right, if it's maybe $1 trillion in savings, and if the Senate plan through the use of the policy baseline and additional tax cuts on top of the top policy baseline is somewhere in the $5.5 trillion range total, 5.x trillion of total spending, tax cuts. Will somebody do the math for me? Because if you have $1 trillion of spending reductions, which is what they're saying they hope to achieve, oh, trust us, even though we don't put anything in the bill requiring achieving the spending restraint. That, by my math, leaves a gap of $4.5 trillion, even if I take them at their word that they'll get $1 trillion. So, on our side, in the House, we estimated $2.5 trillion of growth from tax cuts, or associated with tax cuts and regulatory policy. Well, that to me leaves another $2 trillion delta by my back of the envelope math. That's a problem. So to my Democratic colleagues, we have a, I believe, responsible House budget, even if you disagree with it, where we should sit down and figure out how to find savings, reform Medicaid to make it work better, eliminate improper payments, stop the gaming by California, stop the Medicaid money laundering, get the dollars going to the people you actually want it to go to. And to the gentleman from Massachusetts, make SNAP work better. Whatever we can do as a responsible government, as Congress, we can and should do that. And to my colleagues on this side of the aisle, stop making up math. Stop lying to the American people that you can just magically put something on a board and say, oh, it all pays for itself. It doesn't. Put pen to paper, get an eraser and a pencil and put it down on paper and come show me. And that message for me goes to the White House, to my Senate Republican colleagues, and to the leadership on this side of the aisle. Come show me the math. But I can promise you, while I will vote for the rule out of respect for the chairwoman and the process, I will not vote for this bill because it is not responsible. Because the Senate instructions are what will carry the day. We all know that. So it's all a joke. Because there's nothing limiting the spending on the Senate side, and there's nothing but high side on the tax side. Does the chairman have anything you want to add to that?
I'm sitting here thinking about how I could add to it, but I can't. I can just say I appreciate you laying that out in an intellectually honest way, because we are at an inflection point, and this is going to be the last best opportunity. And it's at a point that if we don't do what was done in the House bill, as you laid out in this balanced budget resolution format, I think we're going to consign our children to a very different future than what we've experienced in this great nation of ours. So I appreciate that sobering framing of this moment at this stage in this process and what's at stake. And I appreciate it very much.
I'll thank the chairman. Now you're back.
Thank you, Mr. Roy. Mr. Norman, you're recognized.
You know, I think this is a perfect example of, we're in two different universes with our good friends on the left. They just believe government is the answer to everything, and they believe that free is better. And, you know, when I hear their comments about caring for children, SNAP benefits, I think you're sincere about that. But when I see the, 600,000 children that came across the border unaccompanied, where was the care for where they're getting their meal? Where was the 15 million that were let in this country to take advantage of every government agency giving driver's licenses, not contributing to the Social Security fund, where was that empathy to stop? Where was the empathy with those astronauts when in space, when Elon Musk offered to get them back, which he did under Donald Trump? They stayed there almost 9 months when their bodies only could take 2 weeks. Where was that empathy? During the 4 years of the Biden administration, where was the, what cuts did they implement? Anywhere. If they won't cut a person who has the bandwidth to find the waste, fraud, and abuse, if they want to cut a man like that to save lives, I don't know, we're just in a different place. And, you know, to say what my good friend said about losing arms and limbs, that's unfair. That's not fair to the taxpayers. That's not fair for the voters. But the voters get it. The good news is the 77 million people get it. And I do think that, you know, so they're not listening to it, but it cheapens the process, really. Mr. Arrington, the deficit in this country as of April 3rd is $36.22 trillion. If you do the math that Mr. Roy is talking about, it's $274,000 per household. If you care about the children, well, it's $499,000 per child on just the debt.
Yes, sir.
The interest exceeds our military budget of $890 billion.
Yes, sir.
And if we don't tackle it now, face it now, I don't know when we're going to face it. And like Mr. Roy said, what the Senate came back with, you know, $4 billion as opposed to the $2 trillion that our committee came up with, that's 0.2%. 0.2%. And to trust us, well, you trust but you verify. Put it on paper. Let's see the math on it. And they're just not willing to do that. Does this make any sense from a, you know, you have to,
Okay.
from any business standpoint? If you take a government that has run up this kind of price tag, do you take them at their word they're going to do what they're saying?
You couldn't, as a private enterprise, sustain the imbalance that we have in our budget, but you certainly, as a private enterprise, wouldn't propose enforceable savings in your organization at a level that is less than the debt you're taking on in just 2 hours of borrowing. That you couldn't do. Your board wouldn't let you. It'd be malfeasance. I don't know if it's criminal, but it'd be foolish.
Pretty close to criminal, because they send us up here to do a job, and it's not, every country that's failed has failed internally, and we're well on the way to failing internally. You can't fund the programs that my good friends on the left say, and if you got a bankrupt government, they're willing to drive it off the cliff, and we're willing to drive it off the cliff. If we can't lock it down to an agreement on $2 trillion, think about that. That's a teardrop in the ocean, to be honest with you.
Yes, sir.
And we passed it with all Republican votes. No Democrats would agree to that. So, I'm going to vote for this to get it out of the Rules Committee. I will not support this on the floor. It doesn't make financial sense. Show me the math. Show me, not intention. Show me what you're going to do. Now, walk me through the instructions at the Senate. Whatever we could have done a resolution with our intentions to get it back over there. But from a timing standpoint, what's your opinion? Do you have a timing? What's the rush on getting something back to the Senate now, when they've waited over a month or longer to get us anything?
I think it's always a combination when you're dealing with something this significant. I think everybody's referred to this piece of legislation as the most consequential bill that of our lifetime. I agree with that. If that's the case, I think you have to move with purpose and with a sense of urgency, because time kills deals. I think that's a true statement in the private sector. I think it's true also of this process. But it's too important also to get it wrong. It's too important for unintended or intended consequences to set us back to a place where we never get out of the hole that we're in as a nation. The just trust us mentality obviously hasn't worked for either party because we are in world war levels of debt in relative peace and prosperity. We wouldn't have 36 trillion of debt. We wouldn't have 2 trillion deficits. We wouldn't be paying 50 cents on every dollar in interest on that debt, more than we pay out now in Medicare benefits, if we could trust these institutions to fulfill their commitments. That's why I prefer the House's resolution, because it's binding. And if you don't bind the politicians in Washington, you, I think, are naive to expect that you're going to get anywhere close to the verbal commitments, which is why I'm imploring in this process to use the House bill as the North Star, as the guidepost to a responsible outcome. Not just for us, but for my 3 children and the children and grandchildren represented here. And I think that's a reasonable request.
Well, I appreciate your hard work on this. I think, you know, we're far away. We've come a long way, the House particularly, with passing what you did on the 10-year balanced budget.
What we did.
Here. So with that, and Madam Chairman, out of respect for you, I thought long and hard about voting against us in here. But that's really not my right to deny this bill to go to the floor and vote on it. So, but anyway, thank you for what you're doing, and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman.
Thank you, Mr. Norman, and I appreciate your doing that. Ms. Fishbach, you're recognized.
Thank you very much. And I don't have any questions. I just want to just sum up a few things. I think Mr. Griffith said it. Let's judge the final product. Let's judge the final product. Let the committees do their work. Let the process happen. And we are almost, as Mr. Norman mentioned, we are almost $37 trillion in debt, and we have to deal with it. I think we all can agree that that has to be dealt with. And we have to look at extending the tax cuts, because we're not talking about millionaires and billionaires. We're talking about, in my district, 77,000 families taking advantage of the child tax credit, that they will see it cut in half if we don't extend those taxes. 55,000 small businesses in my district that will face incredible tax cuts, or excuse me, incredible tax increases if we don't deal with 199A. And so I just want to bring it back to that perspective. And with that, I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Fishbach. Ms. Houchin, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And in the spirit of being brief, I want to thank Chairman Arrington. I'm proud to serve on the Budget Committee with you, sir. Thank you for your hard work and for being here in defense of this budget resolution. One thing is clear, I think we've learned, is that no amount of spending cuts or reforms are going to be approved by our friends on the left, not even $4 billion, as we've seen in their rhetoric today. I associate myself with Mr. Griffith and Ms. Fishbach in their comments, and Madam Chair, I thank you for your leadership, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Houchin. That ends the hearing portion of this Rules Committee meeting. So I thank our witnesses for being here. Mr. Boyle, sorry you didn't get enough questions asked of you.
I would have been glad to defer. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ranking Member.
We'll try to fix that the next time, Mr. Boyle. So,
That's quite all right.
He'll get his opportunity.
seeing no other members wishing to testify on the Senate amendment to H-Con Res 14, this closes the hearing portion of our meeting. The chair will be in receipt of a motion from the gentlewoman from Indiana, Ms. Houchin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I move the committee grant a rule providing for consideration of the Senate amendment to H-Con Res 14. The rule makes an order a motion offered by the chair of the committee on the budget or his designee that the House concur in the Senate amendment to H-Con Res 14. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the motion. The rule provides that the Senate amendment and the motion shall be considered as read. The rule provides 1 hour of general debate.
Hold on one second, Ms. Houchin. Would you please take your conversations out of this room? It is not appropriate. Ms. Houchin, will you please proceed?
The rule provides that the Senate amendment and the motion shall be considered as read. The rule provides 1 hour of general debate on the motion equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on the Budget or their respective designees. Finally, the rule provides that each day during the period from April 9th, 2025 through September 30th, 2025 shall not constitute a calendar day for purposes of Section 202 of the National Emergencies Act, 50 U.S.C. 1622, with respect to a joint resolution terminating a national emergency declared by the President on April 2nd, 2025.
Madam Chair.
Ms. Ledger Fernandez.
Madam Chair, I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee strike Section 2 of the rule, which prevents the House from voting on legislation to repeal President Trump's reckless recent tariffs issued on April 2nd, 2025. Madam Chair, as we've had in the debate today, Trump ran on the idea that he would reduce costs for Americans. And what we are seeing with the tariff wars that he has started and that Republicans are supporting with this rule is that it is a disaster for Americans, for farmers, for manufacturing, for families, for the world order. There is a threat of a recession, and this is all impacting everyday Americans in a way that is disastrous. Republicans, through this rule, are refusing to follow the Constitution, which says that Congress shall have the power to regulate commerce with foreign nations. And we only need 4 Republicans, only 4 Republicans, to vote with Democrats to review the tariffs and stop this madness. But Republicans think that they can stop time, can stop debate, and in that way avoid actually voting on the tariffs, actually debating on the tariffs, which is our job. The same way that we have debated now, we need a debate on the floor. Do you support tariffs that are throwing our economy into a recession? Do you support tariffs that are hurting our families? And if you believe it is good for farmers and ranchers, then say it. Then get up on the floor and debate that. But don't prevent us from having that debate. We only need 4 Republicans to vote with Democrats to stop this madness. And so I move to strike that portion. And I need to remind everybody that when you vote against this motion, you are voting in favor of the tariffs. You are voting to say that Republican leadership and as a whole supports these tariffs, despite the fact that your constituents are suffering from the harm from these tariffs. With that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
Is there further discussion?
Madam Chair?
Mr. McGovern, you're recognized.
Yeah, I just want to support the gentlelady's amendment. Look, President Trump has started a needless trade war that will result in Americans paying higher prices for things that they need to survive, like food. And every American with a retirement account is worried because they're watching their savings evaporate before their eyes due to the turmoil in the markets that were unleashed by this unnecessary trade war. Farmers are wondering if they're going to be able to continue to farm their land. And a little pain, as the President warned, may be okay for Trump and Musk and their billionaire buddies, but it will hurt the rest of America who don't vacation at Mar-a-Lago. Republicans are doing everything they can, rigging the rules and rewriting time itself to avoid a vote on these tariffs. You know how deeply unpopular they are. So here's a chance for Republicans on this committee to stand up for the regular people in your districts who cannot afford to pay higher grocery bills. And I hope the gentlelady's amendment will be made in order.
Ms. Scanlon, you're recognized.
Thank you. I also want to speak in support of this amendment. I mean, to be clear, the Constitution gives Congress, not the President, the authority to impose tariffs. And in certain circumstances, Congress has allowed the President to do that, but Congress retains the power to end those tariffs. So right now, the Speaker and House Republicans want to have a rule to prevent the House from rescinding Trump's tariffs. The Senate has already voted to rescind some of the tariffs, but House Republicans are blocking Congress from doing a constitutional duty, which is to rescind tariffs. So, Ms. Ledger-Fernandez, am I clear that a vote against your amendment is a vote to keep Trump's tariffs?
That is exactly what that vote would be. It would be a vote for the tariffs, and in essence, this committee is voting on behalf of all of their Republicans so that we can never discuss and debate the tariffs on the floor of the House.
It's almost as though our Republican colleagues are trying to hide from a debate about the wisdom and the impact of Trump's tariffs.
If they want to debate the tariffs, we've heard some of our colleagues say they think it's a good thing, well, we should then be able to debate that on the floor of the House and decide. Instead, what they are doing is they are actually stopping time. Let's read this. Provides that each day during the period from April 9th, 2025 shall not constitute a calendar day? Right? They're saying that there are no days. You have stopped time. Republicans cannot stop time. The damages from the tariffs are happening every day. The damages from the tariffs are happening every hour. Look at the stock market gyrations. Look at what's happened to the bond markets. Look at what's happening. Do not believe you can stop time, because the real world, the clock, is proceeding. It's not stop time.
Well, I want to thank my colleague for bringing this amendment. I think it is important. I'd urge a yes vote from everyone so that Congress can exercise its constitutional authority and not hide from the impact of what's going on. And with that, I would yield back.
Thank you. Well, as you know, we keep good records here in the Rules Committee, as you've pointed out today. And while it's well within the minority's right to cry foul on this rule tolling the days on the latest national emergency announced by President Trump, they should really tread carefully on their arguments. I'd like to repeat some of my statements from the floor yesterday and a reminder about those who live in glass houses. This is a tool utilized by both Democrat and Republican majorities now. Once again, during the consideration of the 117th Rules Package, HRES 8, which was supported by every member of the minority in this committee, also, quote, stopped time, end quote, for both legislative and calendar days regarding a myriad of processes, as I detailed yesterday. These manipulations were put in place with no plan to sunset and maintained for 18 months in subsequent rules with continued support by our counterparts in this committee. You heard that right. Under your own rules, one day lasted 18 months in your view. Talk about time travel. Additionally, the then Democrat majority twice blocked debating and voting on resolutions terminating the COVID national emergency as filed by Mr. Gosar. The language here today is not indefinite and has a clear end date, sunsetting after the end of September, unlike the blanket prohibitions on COVID NEA resolutions.
Madam Chair,
Mr. McGovern?
we just believe these tariffs are hurting our constituents. Increasing costs for groceries and everything else are not what our constituents want or what they can deal with. So that's why we're supporting this amendment. I yield back.
And Mr. McGovern? We not only believed at the time that the COVID restrictions were hurting the American people, they've been proven to have done that. So we generally work with proof as opposed to speculation. So hearing none, the questions on the amendment, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed say no. No. In the opinion chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to. Ms. Leisure Fernandez requests a vote. The clerk will call the roll.
Mrs. Fishbach? No. Mrs. Fishbach, no. Mr. Norman? No. Mr. Norman, no. Mrs. Houchin? No. Mrs. Houchin, no. Mr. Langworthy? No. Mr. Langworthy, no. Mr. Scott? No. Mr. Scott, no. Mr. Griffith? No. Mr. Griffith, no. Mr. Jack?
No.
Mr. Jack, no. Mr. McGovern? Mr. McGovern, aye. Ms. Scanlon? Ms. Scanlon, aye. Mr. Neguse? Ms. Leisure Fernandez? Ms. Leisure Fernandez, aye. Mr. Roy? Madam Chair?
No.
Madam Chair, no.
The clerk will report the total.
3 yeas, 8 nays.
The noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to. Are there other amendments or discussions?
Madam Chair.
Ms. Leisure Fernandez, you're
Madam-
recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have an amendment to the rule. I move to add a new section to the rule stating that House Resolution 211 is amended by striking Section 4. This amendment shall take effect as if included in the adoption of House Resolution 211. And I'll remind the public that this House Resolution 211 is where they snuck in the provision that prevents us from taking a vote on the Mexico-Canada tariffs that were imposed by Trump. And once again, because Congress refuses to even consider, House refuses to even consider the impacts of those Mexico-Canada tariffs, which together with the global trade war that Trump has unleashed on Americans and the world, my constituents, world constituents, manufacturing, ranchers, farmers, people's retirement accounts are being destroyed as we speak. Time is moving on, and that time is not being good to America's fortune. I would point out that since Republicans stopped time, prices have increased. One dealership increased its truck prices by over $20,000. Groceries are going up. A planned $1 billion Microsoft investment in Ohio was canceled because of the uncertainty and the likely recession. This is another opportunity where Republicans have the chance to say they are willing to stand up and vote against these tariffs or even debate the tariffs so they can explain why they think they are good. My constituents, and in headlines across the country, it's clear that our voters are against these tariffs. It only takes 4 Republicans in the Senate and 4 Republicans in the House to stop this tariff madness. I urge a yes vote on my amendment so that we can restore America's economy, bring down the price of groceries, and increase manufacturing, because this is not one way to do it. People are fleeing the country rather than coming. With that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Leisure Fernandez. Any further discussion? Hearing none, the questions on the amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed say no.
No.
In the opinion, chair, the noes have it. The amendment's not agreed to. The clerk will call the roll.
Mrs. Fishbach? No. Ms. Fishbach, no. Mr. Norman? Mr. Norman, no. Mr. Roy? Ms. Houchin? Mr. Langworthy? Mr. Langworthy, no. Mr. Scott? Mr. Scott, no. Mr. Griffith? No. Mr. Griffith, no. Mr. Jack?
No.
Ms. Houchin is not recorded. No. Ms. Houchin, no. Mr. McGovern? Mr. McGovern, aye. Ms. Scanlon? Ms. Scanlon, aye. Mr. Neguse? Ms. Ledger Fernandez? Ms. Ledger Fernandez, aye. Madam Chair?
No.
Madam Chair, no.
Clerk will report the total.
3 yeas, 8 nays.
The noes have it, the amendment is not agreed to. Is there any other amendment or discussion?
Yes, Madam Chair, I have an amendment.
Ms. Scanlon, you're recognized.
Madam Chair, I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee make in order Amendment 11 to the Senate Amendment to H-Con Res 14 offered by the ranking member, Mr. McGovern, because of the limited notice provided by the majority, but it was originally authored by Representative Jayapal of Washington. She's listed as a co-sponsor. This amendment prevents the reconciliation bill from cutting Medicaid benefits and creates a point of order against legislation that would cut Medicaid. As Representative Griffith noted earlier, he represents the second highest number of people on Medicaid in his district. Nearly all of us represent over 100,000 people on Medicaid. And what we're hearing is that our Republican colleagues are behind wanting to cut it. So maybe everyone in your districts isn't helped by Medicaid, but I promise everyone knows someone who is, and I don't know why this is supposed to be such a great idea. If you don't cut Medicaid, Medicare, or CHIP, there's only $381 billion left to cut in Energy and Commerce's jurisdiction. So even if you cut literally every single other dollar, you're still $500 billion short. So if you want to prove to your constituents that you're not going to cut Medicaid, a yes vote on this amendment would do so. I yield back.
Is there further discussion on the amendment?
Madam Chair,
Ms. Ledger Fernandez.
I'm going to speak in favor of the amendment, which is similar to amendment number 23, offered by myself, which would protect Medicaid services from funding cuts. As we've discussed earlier, it only takes 4 Republicans in the House in order to specifically protect Medicaid services. We saw courage from 3 Senate Republicans who offered an amendment to specifically protect Medicaid services from cuts. I'd love to see 4 House Republicans do the same, and I am in support of Ms. Scanlon's amendment.
The gentlewoman yields back. Any further discussion? Hearing none, the question's on the amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no.
No.
In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
I ask for a
Ms.
recorded vote.
Scanlon requests a recorded vote. The clerk will call the roll.
Mrs. Fishbach? No. Ms. Fishbach, no. Mr. Norman? No. Mr. Norman, no. Mr. Roy? No. Mr. Roy, no. Ms. Houchin? No. Mrs. Houchin, no. Mr. Langworthy? No. Mr. Langworthy, no. Mr. Scott? No. Mr. Scott, no. Mr. Griffith? No. Mr. Griffith, no. Mr. Jack?
No.
Mr. Jack, no. Mr. McGovern?
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Ms. Scanlon?
Aye.
Scanlon, aye. Mr. Neguse? Ms. Ledger Fernandez? Aye. Ms. Ledger Fernandez, aye. Madam Chair?
No.
Madam Chair, no.
Clerk will report the total.
3 yeas, 9 nays.
The amendment is, and the noes have it, the amendment is not agreed to. Any other amendment?
Madam Chair,
Mr.
I
McGovern?
have 2 amendments. I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee make an order amendment number 13 offered by myself, which strikes the instructions for the House and Senate Agriculture Committees to reduce the deficit by not less than $230 billion and $1 billion respectively for the period of fiscal years 2025 through 2034. My amendment is simple. It protects the modest food benefits that 42 million people in this country rely on. The Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, is our most effective tool to reduce food insecurity for families in every one of our districts. Donald Trump has spent his first 3 months in office wreaking havoc on our economy. And despite his promises and the promises of Republicans in Congress, they haven't done one thing to lower costs for regular people. and the president's new trade war is about to send food prices through the roof. And what's the response from Congress? Cut SNAP benefits, which help regular people afford food, all to pay for tax cuts for billionaires. Give me a break. Republicans voted in lockstep against a similar amendment I offered when we had our Rules Committee markup on the House budget a few weeks ago, but you can redeem yourselves here. You can vote yes on this amendment to help working people, kids, veterans, seniors, and people with disabilities afford food. Or you can vote a no to fund more billionaire tax breaks while taking food out of the mouths of hungry people. I yield back.
Yields back. Any further discussion? Hearing none, the question's on the amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed say no.
No.
In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment's not agreed to.
I ask for a roll call.
McGovern asks for a roll call. The clerk will call the roll.
Mrs. Fishbach? No. Mrs. Fishbach, no. Mr. Norman? No. Mr. Norman, no. Mr. Roy? No. Mr. Roy, no. Mrs. Houchin? Mrs. Houchin, no. Mr. Langworthy? No. Mr. Langworthy, no. Mr. Scott? No. Mr. Scott, no. Mr. Griffith? Mr. Griffith, no. Mr. Jack?
No.
Mr. Jack, no. Mr. McGovern?
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Ms. Scanlon? Ms. Scanlon, aye. Mr. Neguse? Ms. Leisure-Fernandez? Ms. Leisure-Fernandez, aye. Madam Chair?
No.
Madam Chair, no.
Clerk will report the total.
3 yeas, 9 nays.
The noes have it. The amendment's not agreed to. You said you have a second.
I have a final amendment to the rule. I move the committee make an order amendment number 12 offered by myself to prevent tax cuts for people with a net worth of over $1 billion. During our last markup on the budget in this committee, I offered a series of amendments to prevent more tax breaks for millionaires and billionaires, which were all rejected by my Republican colleagues. Billionaires, quite frankly, don't need another tax handout. They are living large, flying from vacation property to vacation property on their private jets, while working people are trying to figure out how they're going to pay their rent and afford food. So here's an opportunity for Republicans to show the American people whose side you are on. Are you with Elon Musk and other billionaires, or do you care about working people having access to food and health care and school meals? A yes vote on this amendment will prevent tax cuts for the richest people on earth. A no vote means that you want to reward the rich and powerful with more tax handouts while cutting programs working people rely on to survive. I yield back.
Is there any further discussion on the amendment? Hearing none, the question is on the amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no.
No.
In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment's not agreed
For a
to.
roll call, Madam Chair.
Mr. McGovern asks for a roll call. The clerk will call the roll.
Mrs. Fishbach? No. Mrs. Fishbach, no. Mr. Norman? No. Mr. Norman, no. Mr. Roy? No. Mr. Roy, no. Mrs. Houchin? No. Mrs. Houchin, no. Mr. Langworthy?
Mr. Langworthy?
Mr. Langworthy, no. Mr. Scott? No. Mr. Scott, no. Mr. Griffith? Mr. Griffith, no. Mr. Jack?
No.
Mr. Jack, no. Mr. McGovern?
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Ms. Scanlon? Aye. Ms. Scanlon, aye. Mr. Neguse? Ms. Leisure-Fernandez? Aye. Ms. Leisure-Fernandez, aye. Madam Chair?
No.
Madam Chair, no.
Clerk will report the total.
3 yeas, 9 nays.
Then the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to. Are there any other amendments or discussions?
Madam Chair.
Ms. Leisure-Fernandez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would point out that the Democrats submitted numerous amendments which would have protected programs that many on this committee and in our districts think are very important and need to be stated. I am going to have a motion to make in order a few of those, which is amendment number 24, 25, and 6 to the Congressional Resolution 14. Number 24 would, following on what the ranking member did, was say, let's make sure that the reconciliation bill does not have any sort of self-dealing, some self-benefit. So it would say that the tax cuts cannot go to those making more than $750,000 who are presently working for President Trump. We should not be passing tax cuts that benefit the people who are pursuing those tax cuts. We also, my amendment would also make sure that we protect programs that would benefit Native Americans funding cuts, and that we do not increase the deficit with the proposed budget. So those are what my amendments would do, and with that, I yield back, Madam Chair.
Any further discussion on the amendment by Ms. Leisure Fernandez? Hearing none, the question's on the amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no.
No.
In the opinion chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
Madam Chair.
Ms. Leisure Fernandez?
So, Madam Chair, I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee make an order amendment number 3 to the Senate Amendment H-Con Resolution 14 offered by Representative Ballant and myself, which creates a new point of order in the House of Representatives against legislation that cuts Social Security benefits, increases the early or full retirement age, or privatizes Social Security. Our constituents are as worried as they are about Medicaid and the tariffs. They're also terrified that we will be cutting Social Security. We have heard Republicans say that they're not going to touch it. This amendment would actually put in writing that we will not touch it. With that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
Is there any further discussion on the amendment? Hearing none, the question is on the amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to. Ms. Leisure Fernandez has requested a recorded vote. The clerk will call the roll.
Mrs. Fishbach? No. Mrs. Fishbach, no. Mr. Norman? Mr. Norman, no. Mr. Roy? No. Mr. Roy, no. Mrs. Houchin? Mrs. Houchin, no. Mr. Langworthy? Mr. Langworthy, no. Mr. Scott? Mr. Scott, no. Mr. Griffith? Mr. Griffith, no. Mr. Jack?
No.
Mr. Jack, no. Mr. McGovern? Mr. McGovern, aye. Ms. Scanlon? Ms. Scanlon, aye. Mr. Neguse? Ms. Leisure Fernandez? Ms. Leisure Fernandez, aye. Madam Chair?
No.
Madam Chair, no.
The clerk will report the total.
3 yeas, 9 nays.
The noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to. Any further discussion or amendments? Hearing no further discussion, the questions on the motion from the gentlewoman from Indiana. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed say no.
No.
In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. Mr. McGovern asked for a roll call. The clerk will call the roll.
Yes.
Aye.
Ms. Leisure Fernandez? Ms. Leisure Fernandez, no. Madam Chair?
Yeah, aye.
Madam Chair, aye.
The clerk will report the totals.
9 yeas, 3 nays.
The ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. The motion to report is agreed to. Accordingly, I will be managing the rule for the majority.
And I'll join you on the floor.
Great, Mr. McGovern. Look forward to it. So, without objection, the committee is adjourned.